на Україні далекій. Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посорбати довбані щі, та трохи у щах перегрівся навар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Зі сходу припхались до нас барани, для восстановлення великої страни, найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Їх доводи, всяке озброєння, різне, ракети, потужні машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар. Байрактар.
Байрактар.
Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, і ми зачаїли на орків образу, з бандитів російських робить примар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, на вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто ж винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає їх цар.
Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and I'm joined by Enforcer Matt.
Hello, everybody.
And tonight we have very interesting and hopefully very optimistic sounding news. Before we move on to even talking about the news tonight, we have had a little bit of an emergency. We're having a little bit of an emergency drop, as you will, and you'll see why I'm dropping it. So anyways, we have been talking a little bit about a future merch drop, and it was supposed to be about a week from now. But the problem is that the merch that we were trying to hold in particular got a little bit too heavy, if you see where I'm going with it, and we kind of just dropped it now. We couldn't hold it anymore. We were going into, like, muscle failure. And so, let's talk about the merch. Mr. Lunchtime, the man, the myth, the legend, and longtime member of Meal Team 6. We've heard some say that he once single-handedly destroyed a McDonald's when he discovered the ice cream machine was still broken. Others say his comrades once made a special request to create a new supply chain to feed this chunk. All we know is his name is Mr. Lunchtime, and for the first time ever, he has been resized. And you heard it right, he's actually been resized to fit on a premium tee. So, make sure to get yours today. Of course, it is a limited run. This run will be running until Saturday. And if you would like to support the channel and also capitalize on the Mr. Lunchtime joke and have something cool to get out of it, make sure to get one of these shirts, because it will be a limited time run. They are pretty funny. And one thing I would like to say before we finally move on from Mr. Lunchtime is that some people think that Mr. Lunchtime serves the Luhansk People's Republic. It's actually the other way around. The Luhansk People's Republic serves Mr. Lunchtime. And so with that, now let's go over tonight's schedule for the news. We're first going to start off in the Kyiv area today. We've actually had a small amount of news just north of Kyiv in the small town called Desna, which was actually just south of Chernihiv by about 30 miles. Once we cover that news, we are then going to move into Russia. We actually have a little bit of news to cover in Russia today. One in Moscow, and then one down here in Chechnya, which is absolutely hilarious. So I hope you all look forward to hearing that one. So, after that, we are then going to, of course, move on to the location unknowns. We'll cover all of the location unknowns, and then we'll start moving towards the Kharkiv front. But before we do, we're going to answer around 3 questions from the chat. Once we answer those 3 questions from the chat, we're then going to move on to the Kharkiv news and the Donbass news as a whole, as we've gotten a little bit of news across the entirety of the front lines today. Then, we're going to move on to Mariupol. Mariupol is pretty much the entire center of tonight's stream. Of course, the title says Mariupol Still Holds, and we actually got information today just for everyone to know, and you can hang out and wait a little bit until I get around to that part of the front to get to that news, because it is very interesting news. A decent amount of the defenders have not surrendered, and they are refusing to surrender, and so we're actually going to be covering that news and covering the evidence we have of them refusing to surrender, and also what's happened to the defenders as far as we've been able to see here on this channel. That did surrender. We're then going to be moving down the rest of the southern front. We have a little bit of news scattered across the entirety of it. And then finally, after we cover all of that news, we will once again go back to Kyiv to listen to the speech from President Zelenskyy here on day 84. And then that will round out the entirety of tonight's stream. So, I hope y'all are ready. Strap yourselves in, because today is a wild ride in terms of the news. Starting off in the town of Desna today, we've seen that the Russians have committed some kind of missile attack against a training center in this town. Here in this video, you can see the training center on fire after the missile impacted and exploded. As you can see, the fire is, of course, burning throughout the building, straight on the rooftop. I'm not really sure if that fire permeates through the rest of the building. Hopefully, there wasn't a large amount of casualties. Fatalities, for certain, is something we don't like at all. And so hopefully there was minimal casualties and very few wounded. But we don't have any figures on that right now. And so we will be waiting and watching to see if we can get any idea of what was actually entailed through this missile attack on this training facility. We're now going to move out of the Kyiv area. We're now going to move into Russia. And we've been hearing a little bit about saboteurs and sabotage here and there on this channel. We, every once in a while, hear about some kind of ammunition factory or some kind of war materials factory catching on fire inside of Russia, or sometimes, very rarely, it's targeted against cultural buildings of the Russians. You know, historic buildings that were built at an earlier time in history. This time, though, we can actually see that another sabotage attempt, much like one that took place in Moscow some time ago, has happened once more, as people have busted open the windows to this office of the Russian Ministry of Defense and threw in Molotov cocktails, burning several archives of conscripts' information. As you can see right here, all of the conscript information that has been charred in the fire. And so, when you see that the saboteurs in Russia are still continuing to do as much as they can to try and slow or hinder the Russian efforts the best they can, we don't really know what effect that information will have on the Russian army right now, with the loss of that information more like it. Considering that some of those soldiers may be on the front line, and losing that information isn't going to make them suddenly disappear. You know, it's not a Thanos snap or anything, but at the same time, that is, of course, going to be a massive headache for the Russians, at least on the administrative side of things, as they now have to rebuild all of these soldiers' files. So we'll be looking at that and seeing what's happening there. We're now going to move on down to Chechnya. And oh my lord, we've seen this man here say some of the stupidest stuff. Alright, and I'm going to let y'all see the video uninterrupted the first time, and then we're going to go through and take a good laugh at this guy. So here's the video.
Вот мы видим, Германии, руководитель Германии ведет себя как шизофреник. Он ведет так, что даже я не понимаю, он не как руководитель государства, ему не интересны мировые правила. И мы сегодня воюем не против Украины, против бандеровцев, мы воюем против НАТО. НАТО их вооружает, Запад вооружают их наемники там. И поэтому нашему государству нелегко, но это очень хороший опыт. Мы докажем, что еще раз, что Россию нельзя победить.
So the war is going pretty bad, Don. The whole entire thing is going terribly, Don. I think we're going to lose, Don. And the Germans, Don, they don't look like they're doing this all too well, Don. And so, Don, I think the best thing for us to do, Don, is to think about what you need to do, Don. So, Don, let me know what Don thinks about what Don should do. So, as you can see right there, this man had nothing to say. And he kept on using Don as like some kind of way to cut down the sentences and make them as simple as possible. And I don't know what's up with this guy, but he doesn't look, sound, or act like anyone who would be a leader. I don't know, that's just me. Maybe y'all can tell me what y'all think. And of course, there's a little bit of bias in there right now. But let me know what y'all think, Don, because I think what Don thinks would be what Don knows and what Don is knowledgeable about. So let me know what y'all think, Don. And so with that, we're now going to move out of Chechnya. I can see the chat blowing up with Don's right now. And for y'all to know, the reason why he's saying Don is because the guy who asked him the question in that audience, his name was Don. And so he just kept on saying Don, which was weird. So I'm now going to move on from that, and the chat's exploding. It's hilarious. We're now going to move on to the location unknowns, where we've gotten a decent amount of interesting information today. Of course, we don't know where any of this happened, so I sadly cannot interpret this to convey any sort of changes or like a steadying of any kind of front lines. We've just seen individual events. So, starting off with the location unknowns, we can see the Ukrainians using an APS-60 gun mounted onto the back of a truck. Now, this is something that is interesting to me. It looks a little dated, I'm going to be honest. And hopefully they can replace this with a more efficient weapon system that they can hopefully get lended to them by the West. But this right here, I don't know about y'all, but this is getting a little bit too, I guess you could say, dated, really, for it to be useful. I mean, like, there will be certain situations where this thing could be used, but I'm not seeing a lot of them, honestly. So let me know what y'all think, Don, because I think the APS-60 isn't exactly up to spec, Don, and so we'll be wondering what Don is thinking about what Don would do with this APS-60 and what he would try and maybe switch them out for if he could, Don. So we can now see them moving another one. This time it's not mounted onto a truck chassis, it's just kind of like towed APS-60. This honestly reminds me a lot of Flak 37 although it is a 60 millimeter, it still reminds me very much so of a German Flak 37 from World War II. And those kinds of systems are very hard to use in modern war. There's not a lot of situations for them to be usable, and so hopefully they won't push that unit into frontline service, because honestly I don't think it would do all too well. But still, it's good to know that the Ukrainians are trying to pull out all the stops and make sure that they defend their country the best they can. And with that, we're going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we've seen something and I was like, why? And I'm going to just show it to y'all because it's weird. I'm not a big fan. Well, I'm probably going to make a lot of people like go crazy here, but I'm not a big fan of anime, and I've never watched anime, and so here we can see a soldier who's really into anime, and I'm just like, why? Because I'm not really into anime. So anyways, here's the video.
No way.
Yeah.
Which part of Kiev? Nice. And what does your rifle say?
It's a lot of funny, I don't know, funny words from films, from anime.
All right, thanks.
So, I mean, like, I guess everyone's got their own preferences, and there's a lot of people who are into anime, but I'm just not one of those people. So when I saw this video, I was like, what? Man, honestly, imagine getting capped with an AK-47 that's covered in anime stickers. Oh, well, actually, that's an AK-74. Yeah, it's definitely a 74. But still, imagine getting domed by someone with anime stickers all over their AK-74. That is massive disrespect right there. If I was shot with an AK-74 that had anime stickers on it, I don't even think I would make it to the pearly gates. I'd be sent straight to hell if I got shot with that. And so we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see Russian special forces torturing Ukrainian prisoners. Now, it goes from somewhat funny stuff to much more serious stuff, honestly. Here we can see Ukrainian prisoners that surrendered to the Russians, and we can now see the Russians pretty much torturing them nearly. So I'm going to let y'all see the video and let y'all see this for yourselves.
Быстрее сюда, сука!
Боря, не бей его! Боря! Не бей его, он хочет сказать что-то интересное.
Быстрее, сука!
Сюда иди! Боря! Сюда иди!
Отрежу башку!
Нож дать тебе?
Отрежу,
Сюда иди его, братец. Сюда это...
Я в армии не служил!
А в кого, сука,
Я служил, сука! Пожалуйста!
Просто ухо просто отрежь! Все.
And at this point in the video, you can see that the Russians have resorted to physically abusing the prisoner and also yelling at him, getting in his face, just trying to freak him out and get inside of his head and, just cause him torment. And that's really sickening. I would be amiss to say I haven't seen the Ukrainians do that. I've seen them do that here and there, but I mean, like, obviously this guy sounds freaked out and beyond belief at this point, and just trying to mess with him like this is just... It doesn't seem right. I'm going to let the video continue.
Все, успокойся. Не надо, не надо. Иди сюда. А, там отсечка. Красавчик.
По мне плачет МХАТ. Штаб у нас там. Вот там сегодня, знаете?
Виктора.
Я не знаю, куда мы.
Дальше.
Нас везли.
Где еще люди? Сколько у вас
Там
людей?
человек 20.
Где? Дальше до посадки еще?
20, 25, 30 где-то.
Ага. Дальше.
Вот там у нас был штаб, и в селе там есть штаб у нас. И
какое у вас оружие?
у меня нема тут
Нет, не у тебя. Я не там, дальше.
А там есть ракеты, пулеметы.
Какие ракеты?
Американские какие-то.
Американские. Опа! Какие именно? Джавелины?
И что-то такое. Вот там на этом есть.
Какие перчатки, Боря? Я свои проебал. Тихо. Дальше.
И этот.
Отдышись, нормально, спокойно, расскажи.
Решай,
Боря, не бей.
Я расскажу вам все. Я сам на мать России, я сам...
Подожди, мы же сказали, что не убьем, сказали?
Да.
Поэтому
мать России.
расскажи все.
Меня заставили эти уроды, честно.
Давай, хорошо.
Они забрали у меня все, я
Тихо,
сидел.
успокойся. Дружище, успокойся. Харен ныть, блин, давай рассказывай. Нет, подожди, давай мы по это потом. Мне интересует балка. Сколько людей дальше? Можешь показать на карте?
На карте попробую, покажите дорогу, вот это где идет. Я сейчас покажу вам места.
And so we can see that the Russians do treat prisoners poorly that they capture. And I have seen some people in the comments saying that they think it's fake, but my question is, why in the world would the Russians fake torturing a prisoner? What would that give them rather than just recording a war crime, pretty much? So, you know, I mean, and, you know, this is something that I've seen a decent amount of people say. Like, I watched a, you know, Ukrainian soldier gouge a Russian prisoner's eye out in a video just to let y'all know what I've seen. And people were saying that that's fake. And I can't go around just because I don't like what's being seen on film and say everything's fake. I believe that this is most likely real. And while he doesn't have any armbands, I believe that you would probably strip the armbands if you're going to be surrendering so that way you don't get shot and you're not being marked as like an enemy combatant just in case someone gets confused and greases you. So that's kind of my take on it. But once again, you know, that's up to everyone, you know, to decide whether you believe this is real or not. I'm leaning more on the side of this seems to be pretty authentic. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news now that we've shown that the Russians, of course, torture their prisoners. And we're now going to move on to the next bit of news. And so, to lighten up what we just saw and move us into the rest of the news, I got this nice little video here of a Ukrainian soldier cuddling a cat. It's a pretty sweet little video, and so here's the video. This poor cat looks worn out, but you can tell that it really loves being held and cuddled in a way. So, of course, it's a very sweet little video, and I once again try and throw these in here and there so that way none of this gets too taxing and tiring for everyone to see and hear the news in general. Once again, very sweet little cat, and it's very nice to see that the Ukrainians do take care of the pets that are still left in these war-torn areas. We're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see the Ukrainians using Malka SPGs. I've also heard these being called peons, or pions. I'm not really sure what the difference is, but here is the video, and it's a good one. Now we can see them rolling the Malkas out into a field. Of course, Ukrainian flag clearly on the vehicle. We can now see the Malkas firing. Now we see a compilation of destroyed Russian vehicles, and of course, incredible to see. And the Malkas are some of the heaviest hitting SPGs that have been put out onto the field by either side. A 230mm shell is about as large as modern artillery gets. If the explosive damage or anything like that is getting any larger, you're usually entering the territory of going beyond an artillery piece, and you're moving into an MLRS or some kind of bomb or something like, or a cruise missile, and, you know, yada yada, so on. So that's one of the largest artillery pieces that both sides use, and both sides use them a pretty decent bit. We've seen a lot of video evidence and picture evidence that both the Russians and the Ukrainians are heavily using Malkas in large areas of the front. We're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see, let me make sure I'm getting this correct. We can see a Piorin, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correct. It's a Polish manpad being used to destroy an Orlan 10 drone. So check this out, of course, pretty neat. We see the missiles in flight. And we hear the explosion of the missile hitting the drone, taking out that Orlan 10. Wonderful to know that the Ukrainians did take it out in Orlan 10. That Nikon camera inside of it, along with its cheap construction, is something to be feared. And while it is funny how cheap they're made, at the same time, any kind of drone that can take any kind of video footage and relay that live to its operator is, of course, a very dangerous system. It could give away the locations of your units, and so it is critically important to shoot them down, no matter how technologically advanced they are. So wonderful to see that the Ukrainians are once again continuing to hold their air defenses forces against drones, aircraft, helicopters, and everything else that you could imagine. And so, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we've seen electronic warfare vehicles of the Russian army being destroyed. Once again, this isn't an unknown location, but we can see the Ukrainians making sure that the only thing electric is the explosions. So here's the video. As we can see, the electronic warfare vehicles are sandwiched in between these two buildings. And we can now see them burning. Great to see, and it's good to know that the Ukrainians are interdicting those, electronic warfare vehicles. I'm getting a little distracted by the chat here. I just saw something roll through. I was like, huh? But anyways, it's wonderful to know that the Ukrainians are interdicting the Russians at every single level, including their, I guess you could say, interdiction units, much like this electronic warfare vehicle that's now been destroyed and will not be interrupting the Ukrainian broadcasts or relays of information. So wonderful to know that the Ukrainians have once again managed to succeed in a small way, and hopefully this does hinder Russian efforts in that area to a small degree. We're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see a Ukrainian soldier using a Mark 19. The Mark 19 grenade launcher uses a 40mm shell, and it is American-made.
Огонь.
Here we can see him firing the 40mm Mark 19. And as you can see, he fired the entire belt, which is pretty crazy, honestly. But still, it's something that maybe they needed to do. I'm not really sure, because I did see a lot of people when I put this out on the short video today saying that this most likely burned out the barrel. I'm not really sure if grenade launchers have rifled barrels. I'm not sure if they're smoothbore or rifled, considering that most larger, I guess you could say, barrels of weapons are usually smoothbore these days, although the 40mm may be rifled. I may just be making a large assumption there. But still, maybe they're trying to use it as like a one-team mortar, and they're trying to just unload as much as possible downrange. I'm not really sure, but once again, firing a gun for an incredibly long amount of time like that can overheat the barrel and lead to warping, which can greatly decrease the accuracy of the weapon, and also lead to a whole bunch of other problems if the warping was to continue to an extreme degree. But here we can see them lifting the Mark 19 off of the tripod. We can now see them packing up the tripod as well. And so it looks like they did a really quick shoot and scoot right there.
Да. Забирай автомат. Забираешь? Сейчас я, блядь, тебе лютры ногу.
So with that, we can see that the Ukrainians are using the Mark 19s, lended to them by the Americans, as pretty much one-team mortars. Hopefully they're being used to great effect. Of course, we don't really know how effective it was downrange, but we could see in this video that based off the amount of rounds that he was sending downrange, I would assume that he hit something, hopefully. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see that the Russians are also using drones. We've known this for a pretty good bit, but once again, here we can see a video of them actually using a drone that I have, which is a DJI Mavic. Let me make sure.
Пришла почти
There we go.
мгновенно. Братиш, расскажи, что это за ноу-хау?
Так, ну это не ноу-хау, это уже как бы давно запатентованное. Тут смысл в чем? Система сброса присутствует. И также граната. Единственное, что мы добавили, это шприц в системе сброса.
То есть это у вас укол называется, я так понимаю. Сделать укол.
Наподобие. Он сейчас кольцо.
We can now see them fiddling with the grenade. I believe that's an RGD-5 that they're about to try and put onto the bottom of this Mavic.
Он вот сюда вставляет.
Там
Вот сейчас он примерно и покажет это.
довольно экстремальное занятие, я так понимаю. Ну вот расскажи, вот сейчас самая интригующая часть, я так понимаю.
Ну вот он кольцо вытаскивает.
So now we can see them pull the pin out of the grenade and once again put it back in.
Обычного шприца, да?
Вот эту ниточку он сейчас на систему сброса.
We now see them putting the grenade onto the drone.
Лекарство готово, да, для неонацистов. Теперь он вставляет туда шприц, вытаскивает иголку.
So you now see them taking the drone to the sky, and it's now on the way with a grenade. And that's the end of the video. They don't actually show us if it did anything, which is really funny to me because the DJI Mavics actually have a little swivel camera on them. So clearly and obviously it's going to see where it's going. But one thing I was wondering is I wonder if putting that grenade onto the drone is going to drain that battery a lot. We've flown around our DJI Mavic and we found out that the range that's advertised on the box isn't actually true. While it says it can go about 5 miles out, that's 5 miles on a one-way trip. If it goes out 5 miles, it's not coming back. It's going to land 4 miles away or so, or just die and just fall out of the sky, although they're not supposed to do that. So really the effective range is like less than 2 miles in actual like practicality. And so I'm wondering, will that cut the range of this drone down to like a mile or like 3/4 of a mile just due to the amount of extra energy it's having to exert to keep itself airborne? I'm not really sure, but still it's something interesting to think about when you're looking at these DJI Mavic drones because we've actually had some experience with them. And I can tell you that these don't really seem like they would be capable to carry a grenade that's pretty hefty, actually. They're probably like 1.5 pounds, you know, and that's not a lot, but still, that's a decent amount for a drone of that size. And I just wonder if it'd be able to actually use it to an effective range, though, and make it somewhat reasonable. We're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see the Ukrainian MLRSs in action again. And so here's the video. We can see the soldier here in the distance, and we can now see the MLRSs firing in the fields behind him. We can now see the soldier standing up and talking about the MLRSs most likely, and we can see the actual MRLS back there, and it does appear to be the Ukrainian version of the Grad. So it's most likely firing some kind of a 157mm rocket or a smaller caliber, although I'm not exactly sure about that. We're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see another captured T-72B3. The Ukrainians can't get enough of these, and we can see here that the Russians are never going to stop providing these tanks to them. So I would like to make sure to give a huge thanks to the Russians and the Russian army as a whole for continuing to supply Ukraine with the necessary materials they need to continue on this war. If it wasn't for the Russians providing them with tanks, small arms, ammunition, and everything in between, the Ukrainians would be having a pretty tough time continuing this war. And it's good to know that they have such a friend in the Russians that they would keep on providing this kind of support and aid to them this long in the war. I mean, like, no one else is stuck around like the Russians. I mean, the Russians, time and time again, I mean, like, they even drive them straight to the Ukrainians, hop out of the vehicles and just walk off. They don't even ask for a ride back to where they came from. And so I gotta say, really impressive. And here we can see another one of the T-72B3s they've dropped off. In pretty good condition. It looks like it's running. I wonder if the tank driver who keeps on dropping these tanks off for the Ukrainians is called Don. That may explain why the Kadyrovite had a whole bunch of Dons to say, if you know what I mean, Don. And so we're going to move on, Don, to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see that there was a close call today with the M777s. Some people have been saying that these artillery pieces were destroyed on film, but I'm finding that questionable. I can see that. I can see where this artillery unit did take some casualties, perhaps, but losing the pieces altogether, I'm not entirely sure, and I'll explain why. Here we can see the crew, and let me just say this, here we can see the crew, here's two of them, moving around the M777 pieces, and it looks like they may be set up, they may be in the process of being set up right now. And so it looks like these pieces just moved to this location, they're setting them up and getting them ready to fire, and this little white speck right here that's flying into the camera is actually a, like, switchblade that the Russians have. It's a suicide drone. And so it's flying straight into the ground right near the M777s, and you can see it hits the ground behind them about 20 yards away from the one on the left. And so the explosion was somewhat sizable, but the thing is that when we look at this clip, hang on, let me go back and show this again. We can see that this soldier is still standing. He doesn't look like he got wounded, at least in that very short part of the clip. which of course is very hard to tell because it was so short, and we know that the other guy was certainly not wounded because he turned around and started running off towards the truck. So, as far as this explosion and how close it was, and assuming that the explosive charge on that drone was small, I'm not really sure if this was a debilitating hit to this artillery battery. But once again, it could be. There could, of course, be some lucky shrapnel hit that hit one of the more fragile pieces of the M777 and led it to being disabled. I'm not entirely sure. But in this next clip, we can see an artillery barrage coming in on some random field. But the problem is, where are the M777s? We don't see them. Like, look, let's take a good look at this. In this area where this barrage hits, there's not a single truck, there's none of the artillery pieces that we saw prior, and on top of that, this field is a completely different color than this one. And so I think the Russians just spliced together two bits of film and tried to make it look like they first hit the artillery battery with a little, like, switchblade kind of drone, and then they finished it off with an artillery barrage, but there is no artillery battery to be seen in this second part of the clip. And so they're hitting nothing from what we can see on film. And so I hope that a lot of people noticed that, because that's something I noticed while this hit in the first video here. Actually looks like it is kind of questionable whether it did cause damage or not, and it may have, and it may have led to specifically this M777 being disabled. This video has nothing to do with the other one. It's in a totally different area. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see, well, actually it's the last two bits. The Ukrainians are also using those Mavics as well. We've, of course, heard a little bit of information that the Ukrainians have been told to not use the Mavics, but as of right now, they are still using them in some units. I'm not really sure if that information is true. I kind of went through my whole entire spiel a while ago about why I think the Chinese getting the information about where these DJIs are being operated wouldn't be able to be used in time or effectively, but here's the video. As you can see, they're surveying some damage caused by some kind of Ukrainian attack on Russian positions.
Ой-ой-ой. Дальше 50.
Дальше 50.
And it looks like this drone operator is attached to a grenade launching unit, I guess you could call it. We can see that that's actually an AGS, which is the 30mm Russian version of the Mark 19. I guess that would be the best analogy in between the two. And we can see that they're actually adjusting the fire of this grenade launcher from this drone operator's view.
Они АГС достают.
Достают АГС. Самое время навалить им. Смотрим.
Вот они, с АГСом.
Сейчас, подожди.
Дальше, да. 30-50 где-то навали дальше.
We now see a Russian on the camera. I don't know what he's doing, but it looks like he may have a friend of his that may be going and having a little bit of a sleep, and it looks like he's carrying him around on the field, trying to drag him off somewhere.
Дойдет.
Yes, that's definitely what he's doing.
Долго идет.
Давай,
Давай, добивай улитку.
Короткими, давай.
Короткими, давай. Давай.
So let's explain what just happened there. On the drone footage, just in case some of y'all can't see it too well, the round that they just fired, you know, once they adjusted the aim, landed right onto that Russian unit, like right dead center of it. And so all that screaming and stuff was them telling that guy, like, hurry up, or like, it hit dead on, start laying into him before they move. And so that's why that grenade the grenade launcher gunner, started to just start laying into the rounds, because now the fire had been coordinated to be precise. And now on this drone footage, if y'all can see it, we're actually going to see all of those rounds come in and start hitting right on that Russian unit. So we're waiting for the grenades to land now. And they should be landing soon on this footage.
Блять, дальше пошел.
Jeez, did y'all see that? That's definitely not a grenade launcher that did that. But up here in the top left corner, well, the top right corner of this phone, you can actually see some kind of massive explosion. It looks like an SPG may have blown up back there based off the size of it. But take a look at that. Right back there, where my mouse cursor is circling.
Перелет!
Перелет. Хорошо!
Не, хорош,
Хорошо!
хорош, хорош, хорош!
Попал!
Now we can see the
Yes!
grenades
Еще,
landing
еще
on
туда!
Mark.
Давай, давай, давай! Он встает и съебывает, он ранен.
Все, съебал.
Съебал в
Там
окоп,
было
но он
трое.
раненый.
Было трое, прям в них попадание. Все, батарея 0, я возвращаюсь.
Возвращайся. Давай ему еще
Прям в
чуть-чуть.
них, Тоха. Охуенно.
Тоха вообще красавчик.
And we could see that those grenade launcher rounds landed dead on the mark, right onto that Russian unit. Of course, we don't have any idea how many casualties they took or fatalities, but it did look like that was certainly going to be a barrage for the books in those Russians' memories, and it was pretty much dead on the mark. Now, what happened in the background on that footage was insane. It looked like a massive explosion occurred, most likely from some kind of armored vehicle like an SPG, like a Mista S, but we can't confirm that because the footage didn't show us that clearly. We're now going to move on beyond this bit of location unknown news and to the last one, where you can see the Ukrainians blast away an MTLB with an RPG-7. Here's the video.
Олежка, помахай.
There's the MTLB. And there went the MTLB. Once again, great to see that the Ukrainians are managing to use all of the arms at their disposal to attack the vehicles that they're best suited for. The RPG-7 is pretty dated. It wouldn't really hold up well against a main battle tank in the modern world, but it does hold up still against armored personnel carriers and lightly armored vehicles, and we can see the Ukrainians were using it to its strength. And so, of course, wonderful to see that the Ukrainians managed to continue using weapons the way they should be used for the large part. And with that, we're now going to start moving on out of the location unknown news and towards the Kharkiv area. But before we do, we're going to answer 3 questions from the chat, and then we'll return to the Kharkiv and Donbass news. And so, with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and hello everybody, it's Enforcer Matt. So first up on the questions, we have one from a longtime channel supporter, BC Skyman, who puts in a $100 donation and says, did you hear about the nuclear moles that supposedly have been planted on the U.S. coast by the Russians? They are nuclear weapons planted near cities, and if detonated, would cause tidal waves that would destroy the cities. I saw this mentioned in 2017 by the Pentagon.
Unfortunately, I have not heard about that particular, I guess you could say, strategy. I'm not really sure if that is something that would be implemented, and once again, what if there was some kind of agreement in the future where those nuclear weapons had to be removed? That would be a very tricky situation to have to deal with. But just to be honest with you, I haven't heard about that, so I really can't weigh in on it, but I do know about some of the nuclear weapons that the United States has lost on the eastern seaboard due to airplane crashes or literally just losing them, and no one knows where they went. So I thank you very much for the support, BC Sky. I mean, it's a wonderful, huge amount of support, but sadly, I have never heard of that. I'll have to look into it, though, and see if I can find some information on it, but of course, the support is always appreciated, and it helps us to run this channel incredibly well. And I once again want to make it clear to everyone that Super Chats support this channel. And if you would like to support Ukraine, we do run Sunday fundraisers. We will be running them after this Sunday with a reduced goal, but still, we do run Sunday fundraisers. So if you would like to support Ukraine, make sure to show up on the Sunday, because then that's when we'll be doing that. So I thank you so much once again for the support, BC Skyman, and I hope that kind of answers the question, although I am a little bit ignorant about that particular situation. And so thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And real quick before we do, I just remembered that something we forgot to mention earlier, and hopefully I'm not sounding like a used car salesman at this point. I hate like bringing up the merch too much, but the merch does go off the store at Friday at midnight Eastern this week. So that's all I'm going to say about that, and back to the question. So next up, we have a $50 donation from Jeremy Tyler, who simply says, Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraine, and I thank you so much for the support. It does help out this channel a lot, and I do thank you very much for helping us to continue our work. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And next up, we have an $18 donation from Duncan VR, who says, I was pleased to hear first Russian soldier tried and got life in Ukraine prison for murder. Apparently 11,000 more cases to go. Whoa. I am glad they're trying them all. Slava Ukraine, grab a pizza.
And I thank you very much for the support. It does help out this channel a lot. I don't want to sound like a broken record with that either, but it's very true. This is the only way we keep it running. But to address that comment, yes, I did hear about that, but I didn't include it in the news today because I'm wanting to get a little bit more details before I add it in. So it'll probably be on tomorrow's news, most likely. But still, I did hear about that today, and it was wonderful to hear that the Ukrainians are prosecuting the Russians that are committing war crimes and that the Russian soldier did plead guilty. One thing that I think is very important to mention is that the Ukrainians have been pretty generous, much more generous than I thought they would be, to the war criminal here, because I thought they would most likely try and bring back the death penalty and have this guy swinging from a rope. But actually they put him in life in prison, which I actually thought was pretty generous considering that the Russians are talking about trying to kill all the Azov prisoners they have, although that's something that is a little bit questionable, but we will be looking into it. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the comment. And with that, we've reached the end of this little question segment. If you have sent in a super chat or you're feeling like sending one in, don't worry. We answer every single one of them by the end of the night, and we also answer some live chat questions as well. And so, with that, we're now going to move on to the Kharkiv and Donbass news. Starting off in Kharkiv, near the front line today, we can see that another MTLB was destroyed on film. Much like in the location unknown, here we can see in this video, a steamy MTLB.
Чтобы потом не говорили, что это украинская мотолеба, вот сразу видно российскую свастику. Ух, воняет как. Видно сразу даже по запаху уже россиянская. Жаль, пулеметика только. Вот. Такая картина. Ну, наши артиллеристы молодцы. Жару дали.
And as you can see, it looks like the Russians are now expanding beyond the washing machine category of domestic goods, and it now looks like they're trying to get into the crockpot/steamer category, as it looks like they're starting to make brand new ones out of their old military vehicles. So, once again, wonderful to see that the Ukrainians are helping them to come up with a brand new kind of product. Hopefully they can sell this a pretty good bit after the war, and if not, that's okay. The Ukrainians will do something with it, like turn it into scrap metal, or something beneficial to their nation. And so with that, we haven't gotten any more news from the Kharkiv front as of today. That was the only bit of news that we got from the front line. We know right now that the Russian front has largely collapsed in this area, although we haven't seen the Ukrainians making any progress that we can account for, although that doesn't mean that no progress is being made. Every once in a while, we do get a massive chunk of information, like when the Ukrainians broke through the Starry Saltiv, and then when they made it to the border. Those generally came out in a massive chunk of news, and the Ukrainians didn't really televise where their troops were and where they were moving up until the points that they reached important locations like the border or Starry Saltiv. So right now, for all I know, Ukrainian soldiers could be up here in Lipsy, and I'm just not aware of it because that information hasn't been made public yet. So we will be waiting to hear some more information, and as far as we know, the Ukrainians do have the upper hand in this area, and they are pushing the Russians back. We will, of course, keep apprised of that situation, and make sure to let everyone know if there are any changes that we can find. And with that, we're now going to move down to the southeastern area of Kharkiv. We actually saw an Mi-8 being shot down on film a pretty good while ago, but just today, we actually got an inspection of the specific helicopter that crashed. This is the remains of an Mi-8 TV. The Mi-8 MTV is actually the attack helicopter version of the Mi-8, which is generally a transport. So imagine like a Black Hawk helicopter, but you strap on some kind of unguided rockets or some kind of anti-tank guided missiles, and that gives you a pretty good idea of what an Mi-8 MTV really is.
Російський вертольот, гелікоптер, точніше, що від нього залишилося. Все, що залишилося від російського вертольота, гелікоптер. Десь тут повинна бути стиральна машинка, пральна машинка. Росіяни вкрали.
I'm still looking for the washing machine in this one.
Може, це інший вертоліт.
bizarre. Haven't seen a washing machine in this whole entire helicopter. Well, Don, I have to say, Don, that the missing the missing washing machine, Don, that was inside of this helicopter, Don, or was supposed to be inside of this helicopter, Don, appears to not be in there, which is very questionable, Don, because the washing machine not being in there, Don, tells us that most likely this crew was trying to do something else rather than get a washing machine out. They're moving beyond the Don joke, but it's very interesting because we usually see washing machines in general, and it's no joke. I mean, like, literally, we see washing machines everywhere. The trenches, vehicles, helicopters, anything you could imagine, they're usually in them. We didn't see one in the wreckage of this helicopter, but you can tell that this one thoroughly burned out, considering that the only section left that is partially intact is the tail rotor section, and nothing of the actual fuselage remains. Of course, helicopters are generally made of some metals that actually burn pretty easily, like aluminum, and so they actually melt, and the helicopter really just pretty much just burns up, literally. Because I did see someone asking, what is it made of, like ash or something? Kind of. I mean, not really. I mean, like, aluminum actually burns pretty easy, and that's why sometimes you'll see that BMP-3s, which are mostly made out of aluminum, when they burn, they just kind of cave in, and it's really weird because you wouldn't imagine them to do that. But if this helicopter was made out of steel, first off, it wouldn't fly, but secondly, it wouldn't really burn like this. It would still generally keep its structure. But in real life, helicopters just burn to the ground, and they pretty much burn into nothing beyond the steel pieces that were on the helicopter, and usually the tail rotor section, since it's largely removed from any kind of fire, considering most of the fuel tanks are in the fuselage. So, interesting to see. This helicopter was actually shot down a little bit ago. It was actually shot down in late April, I believe, if I remember correctly. No, the 26th of March. But this is the first time we've ever seen it on film being inspected by Ukrainian folks on the ground, taking a good look at the helicopter. So it got included in today's news, considering that these press officers went out there and took a look at it today. And so with that, we don't have any more news from the Kharkiv area. Hopefully Ukrainians can keep the upper hand, and the question is, will they? And of course we'll be looking into the news to see if they can. I believe that they will, but once again, the situation is always fluid, and it can turn into different directions, although I don't believe it will. We're now going to move further down the front and towards the Izyum area, where we can see once again that the 45th is hitting Russian positions once more. The other day we saw the 45th Brigade hitting Russian positions, and now we can see it again. Here we can see a village, and right now they have zoomed in to show you the location of multiple Russian vehicles and units. Here we can see a straight line trench, very bad idea, made by the Russians. We can also see a large dugout here near the northern side of the village, if you want to call it the top side of the village. And here at the lower end of the village, we can also see some other kind of entrenchment and maybe a vehicle. We can now see the first artillery shell landing a pretty good ways away. We can now see one of the vehicles trying to move out, and if you noticed, it looks like he left a little Ivan behind. Look at him, he's running. I don't know if y'all saw that. He's right there. He's trying to run behind the truck, and it looks like the truck just left him high and dry. We can now see the truck has gone down the next street and is now pulling into an area near a house. But the next artillery shell landed directly into that dugout that was pointed out at the beginning of the film. Now the truck is once again taking off down the road. Now we can see the next artillery shell landing pretty close to the trench. Now we can see that artillery shell landing very close to the third entrenchment we saw in the video. Another artillery round landed close to the trench, but not close enough, sadly, for me to say that it most likely caused damage. But that artillery barrage, if you would like to call it that, did cause damage to 2 out of the 3 dugouts and hit them nearly directly. Of course, incredibly good to see that the Ukrainian artillery is still nearly dead on accurate, although they do miss a shot here and there. But then again, no one's perfect, and I'm not expecting them to land every single shot. Hitting 2 out of 3 of the emplacements that you're going for in the barrage is still an incredibly good stat. That's a 67% accuracy rating based off of what you were trying to go for at the start. So, of course, wonderful to see. Moving on down towards the Izyum area, we haven't gotten a lot of news. Once again, recap for everyone who may be new to the stream, Izyum is one of the main areas of contention in between the Russians and the Ukrainians, as the Russians have been trying to push out of the Izyum area and break through and start heading southwards along the M03, which is a major highway in this area of Ukraine, towards Slovyansk, which is another major city in the eastern part of Ukraine. If the Russians were able to manage breaking through at Popasna, and also Izyum, and start racing towards Slovyansk, they could encircle a massive pocket of Ukrainian troops that would then be stuck away from their front lines, and the Russians could slowly try and constrict these soldiers little by little into a smaller and smaller pocket until they were either forced to surrender or they were destroyed. That is, of course, something that the Ukrainians have been heavily aware of, and so the defenses around both Izyum and Popasna have been heavily fortified, and the Ukrainians have fought the Russians incredibly hard to this point. They fought them so hard that, as far as we know, offensive operations in both Popasna and Izyum have largely stalled, especially in Izyum, where we have hardcore facts and information to show that the Russian units have completely stopped any offensive operations at the moment, and they do appear to be regrouping for a second push, although that second push will most likely be met with the success that the first one had. We'll, of course, keep an eye out on that situation and see how it unfolds, but as of the moment, that is the news and information that we do have. We're now going to move further down the front and past Le Mans, as no news or video information came out from the Le Mans area today, and we're now going to head towards the area of Rubizhny, where we can see that once again, the Russians hit another nitric acid tank. Of course, this says Ukrainian military. I did look into the guy who posted this, and it does appear that he's a pro-Russian, although everyone else, all the other sources I could see for this video, said the Russians hit this nitric acid tank. Here's the video.
Бать въебало.
Рая нахуй.
Once again, nitric acid is an extremely toxic substance and is very dangerous to inhale or be in the vicinity of without protective gear. So hopefully this stuff will start flying east instead of west over Ukraine, so that way Ukrainian citizens are not affected all too much by the Russians pretty much trying to commit some kind of a passive form of a chemical attack. Once again, everyone knows the nitric acid joke. I'm not going to go over that because nitric acid is actually a bit of a serious issue, and considering that the Russians have once again hit the nitric acid silos is something serious. We're now going to move further down to the Severodonetsk River, which is just south of Rubizhny and also cuts straight through the middle of Lysychansk and Severodonetsk. Here today, we've gotten more footage of the Ukrainian forces going through the process of rigging the bridge, the railway bridge, in between Rubizhny and Severodonetsk to explode, and we've now gotten a better idea of how this operation actually unfolded. And so, here's the video. We see Ukrainian troops with a massive load of mines loading them into the back of a car and leaving the car below the bridge. We now see Ukrainian soldiers moving down a small dirt path somewhere near the railroad bridge and now moving under it. Right now, they're making sure that the area around the bridge is clear. And then they're going to start setting the charges to make sure that this bridge is blown up and make sure that it cannot be used by the Russians under any circumstances. We can now see them placing the charges under the bridge. The charges are, of course, just normal mines without the pressure plate, I guess you could say, in them. And so now you can see them rigging them up with a wire to prepare them to explode. We can now see a unit moving out to the left side of the screen and away from the bridge. We can now see them running back up the dirt road that they went down to the bridge on. And we can see that this man here appears to maybe have the detonator with him. As we can see, a small antenna, just like that one. And now you can see them push down on the detonator.
5 секунд. 3.
Not yet, actually.
2. 1.
Now we can see them push the detonator, and we can hear the explosions from the bridge. Now we can see the footage of what actually happened again. And so that does confirm that that was actually the demolition crew that destroyed that bridge. Wonderful to know that the Ukrainian, I guess you could say, demolition teams, they're most likely some form of engineer unit, are doing an incredibly good job. They looked very professional doing it. And once again, destroying that strategic railway bridge will ensure that the Russians will have a very difficult time crossing the Severodonetsk River and threatening Severodonetsk and Lysychansk with an encirclement. Because for them to actually be able to effectively encircle Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, which is one of their only tactics that they could actually seriously consider, they would first have to cross that river and then start moving southwards and eastwards behind Lysychansk to then encircle the city. So right now it appears that the Russians will have a very difficult time doing that, and we will of course keep an eye out to see if that does remain the case. We're now going to move further down the front line beyond Severodonetsk, because we haven't gotten any news from Severodonetsk today beyond the bridge demolition and also the nitric acid explosion. We're now going to move further down into Luhansk. Here in Luhansk today, we can see an LPR mortar crew at work. This LPR mortar crew does appear to be using some kind of a 61mm or maybe an 80mm mortar. And we see the video starts off with them inside of an armored car. They're now unloading the mortar from the armored car, setting up the actual tube, the tripod, and the base plate. We can now see them firing the piece and bringing up the next round, hanging the round and firing it. We now see the next round being brought up. Next round was fired, and that's the end of the video. Of course, we don't know the effectiveness of this artillery or the effectiveness of this crew. One thing that is interesting to me is that the box of rounds is being kept incredibly far away from the piece, and that's something that, as far as my knowledge of mortar pieces go, is something you really don't want to do, because this guy is going to wear out having to act like Usain Bolt running from the ammo box to the gunner. Well, I guess you could say, I don't know the exact term, and y'all know I'm not really into technical terms, but still, the guy who's actually hanging the rounds and dropping them into the mortar, and this guy's going to get exhausted, and that's really going to start affecting the rate of fire on this mortar in particular. So I'm not really sure if that's a normal strategy, well, a normal doctrine for the Russians to, and pro-Russian forces to implement within their mortar crews, but that is something a little bit questionable to me. We're now going to move a little bit further down the front. We don't know exactly where that was in Luhansk. We know it was in Luhansk somewhere, but we don't know exactly where. So unfortunately, I can't really tie that into any sort of situation in any part of the front. We're now going to move past Popasna, where we know that Ukrainian forces did have to withdraw from the city due to the city being largely devastated and the Ukrainians having no defensive positions anymore that were of any note. So they then retreated out of the city and are currently holding defensive perimeters outside of it. We don't know of any news beyond that, and of course, we will update everyone as soon as we get more news on what's happening in the Popasna area. We're now going to move further down the front and towards the area of Svitlodarsk. Sorry, that's a tough one for me to pronounce. Where we can see Mi-35s operating in the Donbass. Mi-35s are some of the newer versions of the Mi-24 attack helicopters that many of y'all may have grown up knowing. The Mi-35s were simplified in a way, and one of the major features that lets you know it's an Mi-35 versus a normal Mi-24 is that the landing gear will always be down, and that's because the Mi-35 was actually built without retractable landing gear, unlike its earlier versions, the Mi-24. I believe, if I remember correctly, that was an effort to make the Mi-35 more inexpensive and less complicated in terms of its actual operating parts / pieces. And here we can see an Mi-35 firing off rockets in a typical fashion here in the Donbass. Here we can see the helicopter tilting at an upwards angle and firing off its rockets. And it's now going to turn off and hit the deck, and we can see a Ka-52 flying off into the distance right below it, which tells us that that helicopter also fired off a rocket barrage as well. Now we can see the Mi-35 flying almost at treetop level over the car, or the van, or whatever this thing is, and popping flares as it continues to fly off. And you can clearly see that the landing gear there is not retractable, which does tell us it is an Mi-35. Unfortunately, we can't weigh that into any strategic situation on the front line. We don't have a lot of information about that Mi-35, or where it was, or what it was really targeting beyond it was in the Donbass. So sadly, that's all we have on that, and we're now going to move further down the front, where we've seen a decent amount of artillery action occurring in between the Ukrainians and the DPR / pro-Russian forces. Here we can see DPR artillery raining down on the Ukrainians. This is in the area of the village of Novoselovka. That's something that I hopefully pronounced correct, and I'm going to have to mute that. But you can see here the artillery rounds flying in near the village, and on the village in a way, and exploding. Of course, we're not exactly sure if there are Ukrainian units in this village. There most likely are, considering it is on the front line, and we don't know what kind of damage was sustained by this barrage. As we see, the barrage continues, but we don't know the effectiveness of it. Once again, the Russians never really show us, and pro-Russian forces never really show us, any sort of hardcore information about what's actually unfolding on the ground and what actual damage they're inflicting on the Ukrainians. They usually just show us something ambiguous like this, and just leave it to your imagination what it could have done. And so that tells me that most likely did very little, or else they would be prideful and show off the damage that they've inflicted on the Ukrainian units, and we never see that. With that, that is the end of this video, and we can see that the pro-Russian forces are still putting a large amount of pressure on the defensive lines west of the Donbass region that is controlled by the DPR, and it looks like they are still making no progress, as this front line has not changed since the beginning of the war. We're now going to move on down to the area of Avdiivka, where today we've seen artillery landing on Ukrainian troops again. Once again, it appears that the DPR/Russian forces are trying to put a lot of pressure on the Ukrainians, but it looks like the Ukrainian defenses are holding strong. Once again, they have not changed their front lines over the entirety of this war. Here we see a Ukrainian soldier taking a rest in this trench. And this round got dangerously close. Hopefully that Ukrainian soldier was all right. We couldn't exactly tell, but there was the artillery explosion, and we can see him getting down and walking off through the trench, but we're not really sure as to his condition. That round came incredibly close, and it did look like his head may have been peeking up over the trench just a little, but I couldn't tell for certain. So hopefully he's all right, but you can see that that was a very close call for that Ukrainian soldier, and that pro-Russian forces are still bombarding the area in a vain attempt to try and break through the Ukrainian defenses. We're now going to move further down towards the area of Marinka, where today we've seen the, let me make sure I get this correct, the 79th Air Assault Brigade firing Grads at the Russian forces. Here's the video.
Дякуємо, ребята, вам за помощь. А це за Краматорськ.
That's a lot of rockets. Now, here's something I would say if this was a Russian video, because this is usually how it goes. We don't have any information to say how effective that barrage was, because we don't have any information that tells us where those rockets were aimed and where they hit. But this isn't a Russian video. This is a Ukrainian video. And so, crazily enough, I found a follow-up video to that Grad firing, and I found the drone footage of a Ukrainian drone somewhere in the Donbass watching the rockets land downrange on Russian forces. And so here's the video of exactly where those Grad rockets fell. Here we can see the Grad rockets flying in and exploding in the distance. Most likely on Russian units, although we can't see them on film. That's a little too far out for us. But hopefully there are Russian units there. Sadly, I can't confirm it, so I can't really say if they're wiping out a sizable amount of units or not. But they did look like that Grad was aimed in a particular location and hopefully did hit Russian units. With that, of course, it is interesting to see that both sides have pretty much engaged in a large artillery battle over the past week and a half over the area around the Donetsk region, and neither side has managed to make any sizable progress, rather than the Ukrainians recapturing the village of Marinka, which is right outside of Donetsk. Beyond that, there has been no progress on the front lines, and so as far as the situation here, it's largely a draw, but it's slightly in Ukraine's direction, considering that they did mount a successful attack on Marinka and did manage to retake the village. So it's slightly tipping in their direction, but ever so slightly. There's been no progress here on this front line during the entirety of this war, and the only places we've seen the Ukrainians get peeled off of their defensive positions around the Donetsk and Luhansk republics is up here in the north and up here in the south, where their flanks were actually threatened and they had to withdraw from their defensive positions lest they be surrounded or put into a very bad situation. So still, I don't think there's going to be any massive breakthroughs in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, just because those areas have been so heavily fortified, and the soldiers who have been there know the lay of the land incredibly well. And so it's going to be very hard for them to fight and gain any progress on either side in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, specifically on the front lines that have been there since the start of the war. The only way that this position will be threatened is if the Russians or the Ukrainians manage to get behind the defensive lines and start passing them, well, bypassing them pretty much. That'll actually uproot the Ukrainians or the Donetsk and Luhansk defenders from their defensive positions and force them to pretty much, I guess you could say, regroup or withdraw to a more defensible location. Of course, we'll just have to wait and see if any of that does come to pass, and I do hope that the Ukrainians can continue effective artillery barrages and manage to slowly push towards the actual city of Donetsk itself, which is incredibly close to the front lines, just a few miles away in most directions. With that, that is the end of the Kharkiv and Donbass news. Before we actually move on to the topic for tonight's video, and make sure to stay around, by the way, because we're actually going to get into some very interesting information here about Mariupol, we're going to answer another 3 questions from the chat, and then we're going to get to the news that everyone's been waiting for tonight. And so, with that, what do we got, Matthew?
Okay, so next up we have a $50 donation from KG, who says, I've heard unconfirmed rumors that Russia is or has TOR installations on Snake Island. This could pose a real problem for NATO in the Black Sea or even Romania. I'm trying to confirm/deny that, but have you heard of it?
Well, we do know that there were Buke systems on the Snake Island area. I'm not really sure exactly about TORs, but yes, if a TOR or a Buke system was installed on Snake Island and kept there, that would pose a decent amount of problems to NATO airspace within Romania, and also would pose a decent amount of threat to the Ukrainian airspace that they've been trying to take advantage of in the Black Sea area. I'm not really sure if those units still survive, because we did see a video of the Ukrainian Air Force and also drones attacking these anti-air installations on Snake Island and largely destroying them, along with supporting units that were brought in via helicopter and also landing craft and fast attack boats within the vicinity of Snake Island. So I'm not entirely sure if they are still there and if they are still posing a threat, but we do know that anti-air defense units from the Russian military have been sent to the island and have been there at least at some period of time. So I hope that does answer the question, and I thank you so much for the support. It helps out our channel a lot, and I'm very appreciative that you help us to continue to do what we do. So thank you once again, and with that, we're on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from Sean C., who says, thus far, I've only donated to the Doctors Without Borders twice, so I thought I would donate a little beer money for you guys.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, Sean. It does help us out a load, of course, getting the support everyone gives, because it helps us to think into the future, and it also helps us to continue, surviving, because this is my job. I spend 12 hours a day, like 7 days a week doing this, and so I highly appreciate that people do enjoy the effort I go through to try and collect the news and deliver it. So I thank you so much once again. And of course, it's always wonderful to hear that you've sent in support to our fundraisers. Of course, that is the pride and joy of this channel, and I love that more than anything, is that while I'm delivering the news, and that's great, and it's also supporting me and helping me to do this as a job, we're also doing a huge amount of help for Ukraine and everyone there. And so I thank you so much once again, really more so for supporting the fundraisers and the super chat, but I'm still highly appreciative that you help me do what I do. So thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to get on to the news that everyone's been waiting for. So call in your friends, call in everyone, because we've got news to show that the situation that we showed in Mariupol isn't exactly the case today. And with that, we're on to the last question of this segment.
And the last question of this segment goes to Praised Adonai, a very long-time channel supporter, who puts in a $20 donation and says, Enforcer, some U.S. talking heads are beginning to talk compromise and letting Donbass and eastern Ukraine go to Russia. This will grow and to force Ukraine to the diplomatic end. Ukraine wants to keep fighting until they win it all. What do you say?
I think that U.S. politicians will. I haven't really heard a lot of them saying that, and I don't really look at the American political sphere all too much, but I haven't heard a lot of them saying that. But to move on beyond that, I don't think they'll be strong-arming the Ukrainians into taking a compromise. The Ukrainians seem very adamant that they are certainly going to try and retake all of the land that they have lost at least, and maybe even get as ambitious to push into Donetsk and Luhansk and retake it, and maybe even Crimea. So I don't think they will be game exactly to pretty much compromise. I think they would honestly say, we're going to keep going, unless if the United States started to threaten withdrawing their military arms and support that they have been providing to the Ukrainians. So that's kind of a tough situation. It would depend on what the United States would do, but I don't think that's going to become anything serious because everyone's all into making sure that Ukraine's defended, and that would be giving up Ukraine's, I guess you could say, sovereignty and their actual basis for saying this war is wrong if they're ceding that the Russians do deserve to get some extra land within Ukraine. That's kind of my idea on it, but of course, that's just my opinion on the situation. So take it with a grain of salt, but that's what I'm thinking right now. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question, and with that, we have reached the end of this question segment. We're now going to move on to the rest of the Southern Front news and wrap up today's news with a speech from President Zelenskyy, and make sure to call in everyone, because we're about to get into the huge news of today that I think is critically important to cover, and it's showing that the Azov isn't out of the fight yet. Yesterday, I deleted the front line around the Azov defensive perimeter, considering that the orders from the High Command did come down for the Azov and the 36th Infantry Brigade to surrender, and largely, they kind of did. We did see about 300 soldiers surrender the other day. However, today we found out that that's not entirely the case. Apparently, the commander and co-commander of the Azov battalion have not surrendered, and also a large amount of soldiers, somewhere in the range of 900 to maybe even over 1,000 or around 1,500, are still within the Azovstal, and they are refusing to surrender. Here we've seen a photo today that was posted from a soldier that is still within the Azovstal plant, which is also the thumbnail for tonight, where you can see him looking up through the destroyed Azovstal metallurgical plant into the daylight sky, and he's still in there and has not surrendered yet. I'm not really sure what the frontline situation within the Azovstal plant even is like anymore, so this green area is kind of representing the area of control I'm assuming they most likely have. But then again, it could be incorrect. We really have no information on the units that are refusing to surrender and what they're doing. And while this is heroic that they're refusing to surrender and they are pretty much pledging to fight on, much like their promise was at the beginning of the war, is that they would fight to the end, to the very last man, it's a very tricky situation for them. You see, because the thing is that the Ukrainians have arranged an agreement, and regardless whether people believe that the agreement will actually work or not, the Ukrainians arranged an agreement with the Russians that if the Azov was to surrender, they would hand themselves over to the Russians, and then there would be a prisoner exchange where the Ukrainians would get all of the Azov defenders back, and in exchange, the Russians would get an equal number of prisoners back. The Azov refusing to surrender here at the Azovstal plant puts that into question, and also it's violating the orders of the High Command. And the problem with violating orders is that once you violate your military's orders, you're really at the mercy of whatever happens to you at that point, because there's nothing they can do to protect you or diplomatically argue for you, because now you're defying their orders as well. And so the Russians could start doing heinous things to these defenders that are refusing to surrender, and the Ukrainians' hands are tied. They can't sit there and say, hey, you know, that's wrong, y'all can't do that, because then the Russians could just say, well, they violated the agreement that we had, and you know, and so y'all shouldn't be protecting them in the first place, and then that's going to put Ukraine in a pickle. And so while it's great and all to see that they're still in there and they're still refusing to surrender, that they're going to fight on and not let Mariupol fall without literally fighting till the last man, it's still a very questionable situation, and I do hope that they will remain safe and they can manage to maintain some kind of defensive perimeter until the war ends, because the Russians will most likely not take any prisoners beyond this point. We can now see new videos, moving on from that bit of news, of the surrenders that occurred yesterday, as more footage has come out of the Azov defenders that did come out of the plant and surrender to Russian forces. As you see, the Russians are panning down the defenders again. It looks like largely a different camera angle of the same prisoners surrendering for the large part. It looks like the same area on the road. Now you can see the buses carting them away. And so I want to revisit something here real quick, because there's kind of a thing, and while it's great to say and it sounds wonderful and all, there's a little bit of reality isn't as pretty as what people want it to be. And I have to go back and explain what I'm saying here. When the Ukrainian defenders refuse to surrender, they're defying direct orders by the government to surrender. And some people are saying that they didn't surrender, but that's what they did. If you walk out to the enemy army and you let them pat you down and disarm you, and then you get on a bus to be taken somewhere, that's surrendering. So let's just make that clear. That's what that is. The second part is that the units that refuse to surrender are putting themselves in a very precarious situation. They're now defying the orders of the Ukrainian government. That's the problem. You can't go and defy orders of your own government and expect them to stand up for your decisions. They have already gone through the rigmarole of going through negotiations and discussing it with the enemy combatants to have you surrender, and then when they give you the orders to surrender and you refuse, it's out of their hands what happens to you at that point. The Russians could walk in there with flamethrowers and start burning these people alive, and there's really nothing the Ukrainians could do, because now those units have pretty much gone rogue and are now violating the Ukrainian military's orders. And so while it's wonderful to say that the Russians won't be able to violate their rights and, you know, the rules of war and stuff, we already have seen them doing that, and now they're going to have all the reason to do so, because they're not normal combatants anymore. They're now violating orders of the Ukrainian government as well, regardless of how nice that sounds or not. So hopefully they don't get messed with a lot. Hopefully they can defend their ground and the Russians don't pull out anything extra that we haven't already seen. But that is a very precarious situation that they put themselves in, and hopefully there is something that can come to their rescue, because I understand why they didn't turn themselves in. No one trusts the Russians. And there's a good reason to not trust the Russians. They've never done anything and have kept their word with it so far. And so I know why they're not surrendering, because they're scared if they surrender, the Russians are just going to set up mock trials and begin executions. And that's something that's on everyone's minds, even here. And so I understand it, but still, it's a very bad situation for them. And so I hope for the best with them, but that's the rundown. That's the actual serious look at what's going on. And once again, I want to remind everyone, while it doesn't sound pretty, I don't skirt around what the realistic situation is. If the Russians are winning, they're winning. If the Ukrainians are winning, they're winning. If something bad's happening and that's just the way it is, that's the way it is. And so I hate if some people don't like to hear that, but that's the actual rundown of what's going to happen. Once again, if y'all want to remember Castle Itter at the end of World War II, those soldiers actually defied direct orders from the German high command at the end of World War II, and it actually led to the Americans and the Germans teaming up to go storm Castle Itter and overrun these guards that were still running this prison and pretty much shoot them. So if that gives you an idea of what violating orders can lead to, that's what that will most likely end up in. Hopefully not, but that is most likely the most realistic scenario of what's going to unfold. With that, we're now going to move on to the rest of the southern front south of Zaporizhia. Here in this area of the front, we can see that the Russians are most likely begging for a break as the artillery continues to rain down on their positions and once again scorch them. Of course, I have to mute it. But here we can see the artillery raining down right there in the tree line once again. We know that most of the time the Russians keep their units directly in the tree line, like that one that's no longer existing. And finally, we can see that one right there, where my mouse cursor is, and the video ends. I'm not really sure if this one got damaged. It looks like the first shell may have landed close to it, but the vehicle that was certainly within the tree line was definitely destroyed. So, wonderful to see that the Ukrainians are still managing to inflict decent losses on Russian units in that area, and hopefully the Russians are begging for a break, because it looks like the Ukrainians are never going to give them one. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location, well, actually southern front news south of Zaporizhia, where we can see a Russian infantry fighting vehicle get destroyed. Here in this video, we can see the outline of a Russian infantry fighting vehicle, but we're not really sure what kind it is. And we don't really have to worry about it too much because it's certainly not an infantry fighting vehicle anymore. We can now see another bomblet being dropped on what used to be an infantry fighting vehicle, and now it's returned to the earth and it's become the dirt. So I don't think we'll have to worry about identifying that one, even though we couldn't even tell what it was. But it's certainly been destroyed at this point. It may have been an MTLB. It looks like it may have been based off of what the front of the vehicle's looking like, but I can't say that for certain. Once again, great to see, and I hope that the Ukrainians can manage to keep up these kinds of losses for the Russians through their drone forces. We've seen them using drones, of course, incredibly effectively throughout the course of the war, and that has never changed. We're now going to move further down the front and beyond the Zaporizhia Oblast and into the Kherson and Mykolaiv Oblasts, where today we've seen within the Kryvyi Rih pocket, I guess you could call it, the 25th Brigade hitting Russian units with artillery. Of course, the Ukrainians use a heavy dose of artillery. Artillery is one of the shining factors of the Ukrainian military and also their training, considering that most of their tactics so far have been completely revolving around artillery. So here we can see the artillery raining down on this trench, and we saw the Russians trying something smart, which is actually zigzagging the trench, which can break up the shrapnel if a round hits it. But we can see down the rest of this trench, it was generally a straight line, which will allow shrapnel to travel down the length of it. Of course, we can see the artillery is landing very close, if not right on top of the trench. We can now see a BMP-2, I believe, being hit by artillery, and it appears that it was hit as something was smoldering on it. We can now see another blast landing right near that BMP-2 as the crew was running to it. But now we can see that this crewman has laid down into the ground. I'm not really sure if he's been wounded or killed. And we can see that the artillery shells are still landing around this vehicle. We can now see right there, and they didn't show it, which kind of sucks, but still, can't blame them. A round directly hit the BMP-2 and destroyed it. So, incredible to see. Once again, Ukrainian accuracy is at its finest, and I believe that if there was still a large market for mercenaries in the world, much like there was in older times in history, the Ukrainian gunners of the artillery would be the most sought-after mercenary group in that category around the world. They have shown us throughout 3 months that the Ukrainian artillery must be some of the most accurate on Earth. With that, we're now going to move down towards the Kherson area, where we can see that there is a sniper team in the area. Of course, we don't have any videos of them, we just have 2 pictures, but they do look pretty neat. I really can't make any more observations beyond them looking neat, because we don't really have a lot of information beyond they're in Kherson, and they're also in a sniper team. But I have to say, very nice loadout. I like that a lot, and also, I like the rifles. I can't really tell exactly what kind of rifles those are. I'm not really a huge bolt-action rifle fan of the newer rifles. I can tell you all of the old ones, sure, but these, not so much, sadly. So if anyone in the chat knows what these are, please let everyone know, because I'm sure that everyone would appreciate it. And with that, we have reached the end of today's news. So we're now going to move to the speech from President Zelenskyy, and then the stream will end. And so, here's the address from President Zelenskyy today.
Українці, українки, наші захисники і захисниці. Сьогодні один з представників Російської держави повідомив про те, що окупанти нібито почали використовувати в Україні комплекси лазерної зброї. Нібито для економії ракет. По-перше, звертає на себе увагу той факт, що їм знадобилось економити ракети і якось це пояснювати. Тобто, більш ніж 2000 ракет, які російська армія випустила по Україні, були основною частиною їхнього запасу ракет. Тобто далі тільки залишки. По-друге, всі вже побачили, як Росія воює. Недосвідченими строковиками, яких вона кидає у бій, як гарматне м'ясо. Мародерами, які вперше бачать нормальну побутову техніку в чужій країні. Старою радянською бронею без сучасного захисту. Забороненими фосфорними бомбами, якими вони спалюють школи та звичайні житлові будинки. І ракетами, більшість з яких витрачено російською армією на знищення абсолютно цивільної інфраструктури без жодного стратегічного, саме воєнного результату. Цієї доби вони били такими ракетами по Миколаєву, а також по Дніпру. Що ж, в пропаганді нацистської Німеччини був такий термін «вундерваффе» – чудо-зброя. Чим ясніше ставало, що у них немає шансів у війні, тим більше було пропагандистських розмов про дивовижну зброю, яка буде нібито такою потужною, що забезпечить перелом у війні. І ось бачимо, що на 3-му місяці повномасштабної війни Росія пробує знайти свою вундерваффе, нібито лазерну. Це все точно свідчить про повний провал вторгнення, але знов-таки і про те свідчить, що вони бояться визнати, що на найвищому державному і військовому рівні в Росії допущені катастрофічні помилки. Тож будуть придумувати ще не одне вундерваффе, поки Збройні Сили України і усі наші захисники і захисниці покроково звільнятимуть нашу землю. Скільки часу це триватиме? Відповідь на це запитання може дати лише реальна ситуація на полі бою. Намагаємось якнайшвидше, це точно. Ми зобов'язані прогнати окупантів і гарантувати Україні реальну безпеку. Саме тому підписав укази про продовження правового режиму воєнного стану і строку загальної мобілізації. Сподіваюсь, що Верховна Рада України найближчим часом підтримає це рішення. У нашої армії і всіх, хто захищає державу, мають бути усі юридичні інструменти, щоб діяти спокійно. Херсон, Мелітополь, Бердянськ, Енергодар, Маріуполь і всі наші міста і громади, які перебувають під окупацією, під тимчасовою окупацією, мають знати, що Україна повернеться. Про те, що наша держава нікого не кидає і повертає те, що належить Україні по праву, говорив сьогодні у зверненні до Дня вшанування пам'яті жертв депортації кримсько-татарського народу. Ми пам'ятаємо про Крим, і ми ніколи не забудемо ані 1944 рік, геноцид, який влаштувала кримським татарам радянська влада, ані 2014 рік, другу хвилю знищення усього вільного на півострові Крим. Спеціально саме у цей день підписав закон про захист осіб, яких окупанти позбавили свободи, а також про захист членів родин таких людей. Йдеться про усіх бранців Кремля і в Криму, і в окупованій частині Донбасу. Закон дає їм більше захисту і допомоги від держави. Акумулюємо також і всі можливі ресурси світу для підтримки України. Я вдячний Андрію Шевченку, нашому легендарному футболісту, за те, що він став першим амбасадором нового національного бренду України United 24. Це дуже потрібна державі саме зараз платформа, яка дозволяє, зокрема, збирати кошти на підтримку України. Будь-яка людина у світі в один клік може зробити свій внесок у нашу перемогу. Причому за тим напрямком, який вважає найважливішим. Наприклад, оборона і розмінування, медична допомога або відбудова країни. І вже на початку червня зможемо побачити перший спеціальний захід у Лондоні за участі Андрія Шевченка на підтримку United 24. Подякував президентці Європейської комісії Урсулі фон дер Ляєн за оголошений сьогодні пакет допомоги нашій державі. Обсяг у 9 мільярдів євро. А також за підтримку планів по відновленню України. Цей крок Єврокомісії є свідченням справжнього лідерства, на яке здатний Європейський Союз, і однозначно допоможе нам в боротьбі за нашу спільну свободу. Говорив з новим президентом Об'єднаних Арабських Еміратів, привітав його з обранням на посаду, запросив взяти участь у післявоєнній відбудові держави. Обговорили загрозу глобальній продовольчій безпеці, яку спровокувала Росія цим вторгненням. І як це вже традиційно ввечері підписав указ про нагородження наших героїв. 197 військовослужбовців Збройних сил України відзначені державними нагородами, 5 з них посмертно. Також сьогодні мав честь вручити ордени «Золота зірка» військовослужбовцям, яким раніше присвоїв звання Герой України. Зокрема, полковнику Сергію Барановському за мужність та ефективність в боях на Донбасі і полковнику Сергію Мусієнку за особисту хоробрість і успіхи в боях на Харківщині. Вічна слава захисникам і захисницям України. Вічна пам'ять кожному, хто віддав життя за нашу незалежність і свободу. Слава Україні!
And with that, that was a speech from President Zelenskyy once again on day 84. An incredibly good speech today. He said a lot of interesting things, but the most important and interesting thing, since it pertains to our channel, is that he mentioned United 24. And I have been digging and trying to find an EIN number in the GuideStar program for United 24, because this Sunday is going to be our last blowout fundraiser for a little bit, at least. I'm going to let everyone have a break because I don't want everyone to get exhausted with trying to, you know, support these fundraisers as much as they can. But this this fundraiser this Sunday is going to be the last massive one. And we're also going to have Funker 530 on. We're going to have Operator Starsky on. Actually, we're going to have Ronnie Fit from Funker 530 on, not Funker 530 himself, just to make that clear. But he said United 24. I want that to be the fundraiser for this Sunday. If someone can find out if United 24 has now been registered as a GuideStar program, so that way I can find an EIN for it, I would be greatly appreciative, because I cannot find United 24's EIN on the GuideStar program. I just want everyone to know that before we move on to the questions, so that way I can answer that one. And people know I would love to do that. I just haven't been able to find a way to do it yet. So with that, that was the end of President Zelensky's speech, and that was, of course, the end of tonight's news. If you were here for the news alone, thank you so much for watching. If you are new to this channel, make sure to subscribe, because we do run these streams every single night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, covering the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine, and we do this every day of the week except for Mondays. I take that day off. Also, we do daily summaries every single day of the week, summarizing some of the clips that came out from the war today and stating what was happening in them and what may be happening in the bigger picture because of it. And so, with that, that is the end of the news. And so we're now going to move on into the question segment. And so, with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and moving on to the questions. First up, we have a $50 donation from Tim Q, who says, Leaf Springs Don, Slava Ukraine, Heroem Slava.
Well, I thank you very much, Don. It always is, of course, very appreciative, Don, that you're supporting my Leaf Springs, Don, because that really does help Don, help me to run the channel, Don. So thank you once again, Don. It helps us out a lot, Don. And so with that, Don, we're going to move on to the next question, Don, and thank you so much for the support, Don. And so with that, on to the next question.
And so you see, Enforcer, you're now the Leaf Spring Don instead of the Teflon Don.
Yeah, you know, it's kind of like the mob boss, you know, that's what I was thinking about when he said Don. You know, like, kiss the ring, you know, look what they've done to my boy and all that stuff. But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $50 donation from a longtime channel regular, William Allen, who says, I'm sure they are still in comms with military leadership and have coordinated this with the command. Further, the underground facility was designed to survive a nuclear war. What about the German commander of Paris that defied Hitler's orders? ?
Well, I thank you very much for the support, William Allen. You've helped out this channel a lot. And to answer that question, I don't think that they would be in comms with Kyiv and trying to coordinate this with the Ukrainian government. That would be Ukraine pretty much backtracking on their agreement with Russians. And I don't think that the Ukrainians would want to do that, because that would start to make the Russians not really have any reason to hold up their end of the agreement if the Ukrainians didn't hold up theirs. Because this whole entire diplomatic process that's going on right now, this prisoner exchange that they're trying to do, is all about trusting the other side enough to actually have it happen. And if the Ukrainian government told the Azov, surrender, and then they went back and told them don't surrender, sit in there and like tough it out, that's sending mixed signals, and the Russians would most likely know that those are the mixed signals being sent. And so I'm not I'm not 100% into the idea that these guys are doing this based off of orders. They've been ordered to surrender, and that's what they should be doing. Those are the orders that were public, and that's what Zelenskyy said himself. He said they're going to surrender so that way we can save their lives and have them brought back to Ukraine living and as heroes. So on that part, I think we'll have to disagree on that. But the underground facility was designed to survive a nuclear war. That part is correct. But we have seen, although it was able to survive a nuclear war, supposedly, we have seen the roof caving in several times on video there in the Azovstal. So while it could survive a nuclear blast, I'm not really sure if it was meant to survive multiple, I guess you could say, like, weeks of bombing attacks on it. Maybe that's starting to compromise the structural integrity of the bunker, because we've had about 6 or 7 separate videos where massive cave-ins occurred inside of it. So it was meant to survive a nuclear blast, though. That is correct. And then what about the German commander at Paris that defied Hitler's orders? Just for everyone who doesn't know, a little quick history lesson here. Hitler actually gave an order to the German commander of the garrison within Paris to destroy the city, pretty much. Like, tear everything down, demolish the Eiffel Tower, go through and deface pretty much any kind of monument that they could find, or any kind of cultural building within Paris, and destroy the city. But the commander that was in charge of Paris had too much of a love for the city and historic value to actually carry through on those orders. And so instead of destroying the city and then fighting to the last man to defend it, he actually gave up Paris without a fight and just moved the German forces out of Paris. There were, of course, a few small firefights that occurred within Paris. Very, very small. When I say that, I mean tiny. But for the large part, that commander just defied orders and then retreated pretty much the entire garrison out of Paris and just left it into the Americans, the British, and the Free French's hands, which was very nice of that guy. It was one of the shining moments of World War II, because if that guy had followed through on his orders, Paris wouldn't look like the well, it wouldn't look at all like it is now, and there certainly wouldn't be any kind of historical monuments and cultural buildings that would have been left afterwards. Hence what I was talking about just a second ago. But yes, that is an interesting little tidbit. And so, I thank you very much for the support, William Allen. I hope I've answered all of those, I guess you could say, comments and questions with my opinions. Once again, they are my opinions, so take them with a grain of salt. I might be wrong, but I see why the Azov would not want to surrender. But I'm not really sure if that's something that they've been told to do by the Ukrainian government, considering that the Ukrainian government asked them to surrender and said that they've done their job. That may be posturing, but I feel like that'd be really weird posturing, considering that around 300 of those Azov defenders have already surrendered just yesterday. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And moving on, we have a $20 donation from 3 Michael, who says, I love the stream and the dog videos and the impressive military knowledge, and all that is a winner. My thought, if the failures of the Russian army are so obvious, the actual situation on the ground is worse, perhaps way worse. What do you think?
Yes, I would have to agree with the assessment that it's really bad. It's not really bad by the actual manpower and vehicle standards. The Russians are doing pretty well in that category, although they're getting them slaughtered. The problem, though, is their supply lines. As far as we know, they still haven't fixed them for the large part. Units are still lacking supplies. There's still raids on grocery stores being conducted from what I've been able to hear, and they're doing very poorly on that. And that's also leading to a smaller amount of their army being able to conduct offensive operations at a single time, because they don't even have the resources like the gas or anything to actually move enough to actually push an offensive. And so that's why we may see some areas of the front, like the Izyum area, just completely stalling, and they're now regrouping, is so that way they're not burning up resources they literally don't have, and they're waiting to replenish like their gas and ammo reserves to then try another offensive. So I would have to agree that the situation on the ground has to be incredibly poor, because once again, much like the Northern Front, we've now seen that this offensive has almost completely ground to a halt at this point, where nothing is occurring in the Russians' favor except in the area of Severodonetsk. That's the only area, and so far, while they did take the city of Rubizhny, they have not crossed the Severodonetsk River, which means that everything down there still isn't going in a good direction for them. And so with that, I hope I've addressed that question pretty well, and I can agree that the situation on the ground does not look good for the Russians. So I thank you very much for the support. Hope that answers the question. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And next up, let me recognize Jonathan Gordon for sending in a $20 super chat. He doesn't leave a comment, but thank you, Jonathan, for your support of the channel. That's very generous of you, and we appreciate it very much. And moving on, we have a $15 super chat from S. Moore, who says, actually has some bad news. They say, sorry to report that Marvelous Meredith, the blue-eyed sockeye salmon, was eaten by a killer whale.
No!
But she will be replaced soon. She mentions, buy Matt a basket of shrimp and chips to keep him working. And I think that's the second death in the salmon nation in a short period of time.
Yeah, it sounds like they're having a lot of internal struggles over there. Are they okay? Because it sounds like they're almost like the Turks at this point. They're going through multiple coups. And so I don't know if they're being killed by killer whales at this point or anything, or if this is like some kind of a sockeye like assassination attempt where they sock him in the eye. But that's a cheesy joke. But anyways, I thank you very much for the support, and I hate to hear the unfortunate news that the second leader of the Sockeye Nation has now been killed. We will, of course, be waiting for their successor, and we will, of course, welcome them with open arms. The Sockeye Nation is, of course, an ally of the Leaf Spring Army. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support and also the little joke. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have an $11 donation from Rob Scott, who says, is Enforcer Matt really Fuzzy Bunny in disguise, LOL? And I have no idea what that means, Rob. Maybe Enforcer can enlighten me if that's a joke.
Can you reread that one more time?
He says, is Enforcer Matt really Fuzzy Bunny in disguise?
Fuzzy Bunny.
I have no idea if that's like a meme or a joke or something.
Boy, look at that thing. Golly, this thing's rotund. That's not even a rabbit. I pulled up Fuzzy Bunny to figure out if this was like something that actually meant something, but I just found a giant rotund rabbit. Jesus. This is
Mr. Lunchtime's rabbit.
It's Mr. Lunchtime in rabbit form. God, are you seeing this?
It's actually delayed for me, but I think it's about to pop up in a second.
Golly, this thing is round. I mean, I know we're talking about Ukraine war news, but geez, y'all, I think y'all can appreciate the roundness of this rabbit. It's a sphere. Insane. I can't believe that, honestly. But I don't know what that's talking about. I pulled up Fuzzy Bunny, and this is what I got as a large rotund rabbit. And so, sadly, unless this is Mr. Lunchtime, I don't know what you're talking about. So I'm going to have to say no, just because I'm lacking information on it. But I do thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
So moving on, we have a $10 donation from It Takes All Kinds, who says, Enforcer, what do you think might happen if Russia were to control all the food exports from both Russia and Ukraine? It's such a huge percent of global yield that it's frightening to imagine.
Well, while it's a huge amount of global yield, that's incredibly true. Ukraine is a bread basket of Eastern Europe, and really Europe as a whole. The thing is, though, is that the Russians did control that. They're not going to shut down the food exports, per se, to other countries. The countries that Ukraine generally exports food to is not the European Union. It's actually usually Middle Eastern and African countries. And so the Russians would never stop providing food down there because strategically, the Middle East is somewhat aligned with the Russians, more so than the Americans. And also in Africa, the African nations generally just go any direction they can as long as they're making sure that like basic requirements are met. So I don't think they would stop their exports of food to both the Middle East and Africa because there's nothing that would be, I guess you could say, of strategic interest to actually put that into play, really. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question in a way. And yes, that would be somewhat concerning, but not too concerning, considering that I believe most of the European nations, which would be the only countries in the world to heavily rely on Ukrainian food exports beyond the Middle East and Africa, I believe they mostly grow a somewhat decent portion of their own food, or they buy it from other places. I could, of course, check that real quick, and we will. Where does the EU get food imports? Let's see, EU and food. Do we have like some kind of graph on this that could just tell us this information really quickly? Let me try and find this information, because this is really what wars are fought about, as resources. So it's always important to see what the resource connections are looking like. So, EU trade in food. They export $84 billion of food to both the United States, China, and Switzerland. Neat. And then they also import $101 billion of food, and their top partners, according to this graphic, this infographic, at the time this was made, which was in 2016, is Brazil, the United States, and Norway. Let me see if we can find another graph here. This is from 2018. So let's see. Export-wise, a large amount of their food goes to other countries. 16% of it goes to the United States, 8% goes to mainland China, 6% to Switzerland, and then it gets broken down into other countries. They actually export 4% of their exports to Russia. Import-wise, on the other hand, Brazil and the United States are pretty much tied in 2018 in the amount of food that they're exporting to the European Union. And we can see here that both of them provide 8%, and 64% is just others. So pretty much all of those countries that are in the other segment make up a small percentage on their own that they don't even matter to be counted. I'm sure that Ukraine is actually within that other section, but at the same time, there's such a small percentage that they're not actually noticeable. So I don't feel like it would be a strategic hindrance to the European Union or the United States, considering it looks like they get most of their food imports from the United States, Brazil, Norway, China, Argentina, and Turkey. And most of those are Western aligned, if not Western countries themselves. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question in a way, because while it is, of course, incredibly important to the food situation around the world, it's not necessarily important to Western aligned nations and the United States sphere of influence. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $50 donation from John Boyer. And thank you very much, John, for that generous donation. He says, Enforcer and Enforcer Matt, are the Germans still intent on sending their latest 100-plus self-propelled 105mm howitzers? Keep up the great work. You are highly adept gentlemen. What would we do without you? Slava Ukraine. And thank you very much, John. It's very nice of you.
And it is very nice of you, John. I do have to say, it's very nice to get nice comments like that. Of course, Matthew and me just think we're normal. Apparently we're freaks or something. I don't know. But I thank you very much for the support and finding us to be of good quality. To answer that question, yes, the Germans are still adamant on sending over the Panzerhaubitze 2000s. I think that they actually use a larger gun than 105, although I could be wrong. Let's pull that up. Panzerhaubitze. And now this is something that always triggers people is when I pull something up, because I want it to be a learning lesson for me and everyone else. And then someone's like, oh, you ought to just know this stuff off the top of your head. And how am I supposed to? But anyways, let's go down to the main armament. So the Panzerhaubitze 2000 uses the 155mm L52. So I think you may be talking about the M109 Paladins if the Germans still have them. So let me check Germany. I believe that they would have some, or they may have been former operators of the piece. So let's go through Wikipedia here and let's see who's the operators. So Germany used to be former operators, and they phased all of their M109s out for the Panzerhaubitze system. So they had 570 of them. Maybe those were put in storage and they're pulling them back out, and that's what you're talking about? Because I believe that those were 105s, weren't they? Nope, they're 155s as well. I think that may have just been a typo. I think you may have put in a 0, but it was supposed to be a 5. So in general, they've been talking about sending over Panzerhaubitze, so we're going to go back to that. And so, yes, I've heard that they're going to be sending over around 20. I don't know about 100, but they may have upped that number to around 100. But yes, they are still very adamant on sending them over. And of course, it's a great deal of support to the Ukrainians, because heavy artillery pieces is what their military revolves around, and actually pushing any kind of offensives or ensuring that their defensive positions are strong. So hopefully these will be of great use. And to answer the question, yes, they are actually going to be sending these over. And they're very competent systems. So with that, I thank you so much for the support once again, John Boyer. Just make sure I get your name. Yep, it's right. And I thank you very much for the support. It does help us out a lot. And I'm very glad to know that you do enjoy this channel and what we do. And with that, we're moving on to the next question.
And up next, we have 3 super chats without comments. Actually, one has a comment, but it's very short. We have a $10 donation from, oh Lord, let's see if I can say this, Trang Quinen. I'm not really sure how to say that at all. I just butchered that. I'm going to get roasted for it. Thank you very much, Trang, for your $10 donation. Up next, we have a $10 donation from Krister Peterson. Thank you very much, Krister. You're around the channel quite a bit, and we appreciate your support. And then we have a $10 donation from Michelle Reed, who says, Slava Ukraine.
And Slava Ukraine to you as well, and I thank you all so much for your support. It helps out this channel a lot, and I always want to make this clear because sometimes some people may be coming in and I don't want them to send in a super chat and think that this will be supporting Ukraine. This is supporting the channel. I just want to make that incredibly clear. And here's why. And I know that these people are trolls, but I still want to make sure that everyone has a clear a division in between what's actually supporting Ukraine and what's supporting this channel. I had a comment today from someone, and they said, I think you're a scammer and a con artist because you keep on asking for donations on these Sunday fundraisers for scammy organizations like the American Red Cross. And so they said, and by the way, if you delete these comments, you're only confirming what I believe. So obviously I deleted them, not because he's right, but because it was stupid. And he was going to sit there and say, you're a con man, and if you delete me, you're a con man. And I was like, okay, then I have nothing to lose. But still, I want to make it clear to everyone that super chats support the channel and support me. And so if you do enjoy what I'm doing and want me to keep doing it, that's what the super chats are for. If you want to support Ukraine, we run Sunday fundraisers. We also have a link in the description below where you can go and fund organizations that are currently operating in Ukraine. And so I just want to make that clear again, so that way there's no misunderstandings here and everyone knows what's doing what. If you're sending in support to this channel, where is it actually going? So I thank you all once again for the support. I hope that clears that up for some people, just in case if some people are wondering what the super chats are actually for, is to support this channel and keep us doing what we do. And so with that, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Philippe Grandstrom, who says, I want to thank you, Enforcer, and Matt for your content. I've been watching since day one, but this is one of the first times I'm here live because of the time difference. Also, I hope the cadaverites are done for soon.
Oh, she's making a pun on the Don.
Oh, okay.
Well, thank you very much for supporting. It's great to hear that you finally caught one live. A lot of people always, like, it's weird to me because people send in super chats and they always sound like they're taking like a religious pilgrimage and they finally arrived and, you know, they're here on the live stream. And it's so cool to know that you do love these streams and you watch them and you're finally able to catch one live. That's really cool. And I hope that you are very happy to have found it live and see this news unfold as it does every night on stream. And so I thank you so much for the support. I'm glad that you enjoyed the stream a lot, and it's good to know that you finally hopped on. And of course, you said that the time zones are different, and so the whole entire chat's about to explode and say where they're from. And I'm totally fine with that. It's cool to always see. There's a lot of American viewers in here, and a lot of them are proud of the exact state they come from, which is really cool, honestly. But I do thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the comment, and I thank you so much for enjoying this channel. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And moving on, we have a $10 donation from VMan29397, who says, thoughts on the idea of doing a Saint Nazaire-style raid on the Crimean bridge. Ukraine takes civilian vessels rigged with explosives, ram the bridge. Ukraine Air Force launches diversionary attack to distract Russia.
Actually, Matthew, it's Saint Nazaire. Get it correct. I'm just playing. It's no big deal. But yes, I know what you're talking about, and I thank you very much for the support. For those of y'all who don't know, Saint Nazaire is actually a port within France. Let me try and find it here on this map. There it is, Saint Nazaire. I actually zoomed in right on it. And Saint Nazaire was actually one of the few port cities on the French coast that could actually support the dry docking and repairs of the Tirpitz and Bismarck. The Bismarck, I believe, had already been sunk at that point, so it was really just the Tirpitz. But the British wanted to make sure that the Tirpitz would have to go all the way back to Germany, I believe to either Bremen or Hamburg, to get the repairs it would ever need if it was to be damaged. And so what they did is they got this old Clemson-class destroyer that the United States had given them, and they rigged the thing with explosives in the front of the ship. And so then they took this crew, I believe, of SAS men, and they pretty much told them the basics of how to guide the ship in. They then sent the ship in along with some smaller boats. I believe they were, oh man, I forgot which kind of class of boat they were, but they were very small. I mean, like Fairmiles maybe, but anyways, they took the Fairmiles and the Clemson steamed full speed into this dry dock here that you can actually see still. It's still here. And so it ran into the dock. It didn't explode, and that was the plan. It was supposed to explode after like a certain amount of time. And so then the crew got out of the, got off the ship, and they went running around the port, and they started throwing explosives into the pump rooms and into like the mechanisms of the dry dock and all of that. And the whole entire goal was to try and destroy as much of it as possible. And I believe they also tried to go and cause a decent amount of damage to the submarine pens that were also in this port. Not really sure about that though, but I think that was something that they did try and do. And so finally, the Germans finally kind of like overpowered them, and they all generally surrendered without a fight. I don't really think any of them were killed all too much. And so what was so funny is that I actually remember watching a documentary about this in great detail. It's an incredibly interesting story. And so all of the SAS men had been rounded up, and the Germans started sitting there and talking to him in English, saying, "You know how stupid it is to run the ship, into the dry dock? It was going to do absolutely nothing. This was pointless." And then right when he was saying that to this British officer who was running this SAS crew, the destroyer exploded. And, it's filled with I think several thousand tons of explosives, so it went up like a nuclear bomb nearly. And of course, I'm exaggerating when I say that. And it blew up the entire gate to the dry dock, and the whole entire thing just flooded. The pumps were destroyed, and everything went to hell in a handbasket. And so it was one of the coolest stories of a raid in World War II. And there's loads of stories like that of brave men doing incredibly extraordinary things throughout the course of the war. But to touch on the story of Saint-Nazaire and give you all an idea of what he's talking about, that's the story. And so now we're going to go back to the modern day here in 2022 in Ukraine and say, could a Saint-Nazaire raid be possible? The answer to that would be probably not. Because you see, the thing is that they don't control any more coastline down here in the Azov Sea, which would be the closest way to the Kerch Strait. They would have to go and get these boats in Odessa and somehow keep them running long enough to skirt past the Russian Navy. They would pretty much have to skirt around the entirety of the Black Sea towards Kerch and then make a straight line towards, the Crimean Bridge and then ram into the I guess you could say pillars, the supporting pillars of the bridge, and then explode. And that would be pretty tough. And so I'm not really sure if it would be possible, but it is something that one could imagine. Right now, we do know that the Ukrainians do lack the ability to actually attack the bridge. We went over that with Operator Starsky on stream, and he actually was like, "Oh my God, will people stop asking the question?" And to answer that question, right now, the Ukrainians just generally lack the ability, by and large, to actually do anything meaningful towards the destruction of that bridge. So I hope y'all did enjoy the Saint-Nazaire story, and also I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question, at least as far as I'm concerned and what I can get from the situation based off of what I think would be sensible. And so with that, I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And Enforcer, I think we just hit 60,000 subscribers. One of the viewers said we did. Do you want to confirm that?
Let's check. Hey, we reached 60,150. Well, I welcome like the 200 new people to the Leaf Spring Army that have joined during the stream. That's really cool. And I do thank you all so much for enjoying the stream and finding it worthy enough to subscribe. So I thank you all so much once again. And we have reached 60,000 subs. We're now going to be on our way to 70,000 before long. And so that's actually going to get us really close to 100K. And I can't believe that we're going to be getting really close to 100K soon. So I thank you all so much once again for subscribing and enjoying the content here. It's really cool that y'all do enjoy it this much. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and moving on, we have a $10 donation from Spencer P, who says, "Have you thought about having Ryan Macbeth on? Seems like a perfect fit. I've been lurking since week 1 and figured it's time to say hi. Keep fighting the good fight."
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and let's pull up Ryan Macbeth. Also, by the way, just a quick little plug, I found this channel here called SideQuest. They're fairly new, and if y'all are just interested in general history and general facts presented in a funny and entertaining way, he does very short videos that are incredibly interesting. And so, I'm not sponsored by him, obviously. I just like his channel, and so I was looking at that, and I was like, yeah, y'all should go check that out. Anyways, let's pull up Ryan Macbeth. Ryan Macbeth, 221,000 subs. Russian tankers now using kill rings. Interesting. Why can't NATO give F-16s to Ukraine? Looks like he's giving out some interesting tidbits. I have to watch his videos and see what he's saying, but they're really short. But I like what his titles are. They're hitting on some very interesting subjects that I have, of course, my ideas on. And so I'll think about it. That would be an interesting one. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the question, and with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
All right, and moving on, we have a $17 donation from Ben Wynn. And Ben, I think I might actually know you, so it's good to see you if you are the Ben that I actually know. So his question is, why isn't Georgia exploiting the current situation to retake their lost land? F the trolls, by the way.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, Ben. And wait a minute, didn't I know Ben as well?
I don't think so. I think this is a different Ben that you're not familiar with.
Oh man, I remember. Remember we both had a friend in high school that was like Ben Wynn. You know, he was like in the same class that we were in.
Yeah, it might be a common name though because Wynn's pretty common.
That's pretty true. It's a very common name. So thank you very much for the support, Ben. We're trying to figure out if we know you from somewhere. But to answer the question, Georgia is not exploiting the current situation because Georgia is fairly weak. If we pull up the Georgian armed forces, and you know, while the Russians are getting themselves handed to themselves pretty much by the Ukrainians, let's see, active personnel in the entire defense forces of Georgia, there's only 37,000 active personnel. And so it's not a lot. And while they do have a decent amount of people reaching military age and available for military service, those of course would have to be mobilized. And we have no idea about the supply situation of the Georgians, how well off their military is, how well funded they are. That's a whole entire deep dive I'd really have to do on their situation to see if anything like that would be possible. But I feel like the Georgians would be an advantageous group of people. And if they saw an area where they could actually exploit a weakness of the Russians and regain those proxy countries that now exist within Georgia, South Ossetia, and also Abkhazan, I think they would definitely do that. But I think that there's just no way for them to actually take advantage of the situation and make anything meaningful of it. So I thank you very much for the support, and I thank you once again for saying F the trolls, because it kind of irks me a little bit when trolls say that stuff, because I've been trying to do as much help as possible, and you know, while they're trolls and they just go around and get a rise out of people, that's the whole thing they do. It's still kind of annoying because you sit there and you're like, well, like, I've raised $236,000 for Ukraine. You're going to call me scummy because I'm trying to help them? You know, it's like, it just makes no sense. And even though, you know, they are just trying to pull your chain or get a rise out of you, it does annoy me just a hair. And it's always something that I'm like, maybe I need to clear it up on stream because I'm not saying it enough and people are actually thinking that. I don't know. But I do thank you very much for the support. And I hope that does kind of address the question in a way. So thank you once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have another $10 donation from BC Skyman, who says, I also highly recommend I Stand With Ukraine _ Natalia. They interview the Russian POWs. It's very interesting to hear the Russian side.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I may consider that as well. There's a lot of Ukrainian YouTubers out there, and also people covering this war as well, that I would be interested in having on stream. The question is, how many Sundays will be left in this war for me to be able to bring a lot of, you know, all these people on? Because I'd love to, like, make the Sundays kind of like a talk show news session thing, because I think it's neat. And it also is really neat because a lot of people always want me to talk to them and, you know, like, shoot back ideas in between the both of them. So I thank you very much for the support. I think I might actually look into that and see about that. And right now, honestly, we're going to have to start compiling a massive list of people we will be looking at bringing on. But of course, our priority is bringing on people from the Ukrainian government if possible. And so we're still looking into that, although it seems like we may have hit a small roadblock as of now. But with that, I thank you very much once again for the support and the suggestion, BC Skyman. You've been helping out this stream a lot, so I will try and look into that. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from I Am the Goofy One, and he does not leave a comment. So thank you very much for your support. It's appreciated. And moving on to the next one, we have a $10 donation from Meg Hefner, who says, I am not sure if everyone knows, but Sir Don's a lot is Ramzan Kadyrov, the guy in charge of the bad Chechens. Put this toward a pizza. Thanks for the hard work that you guys put in.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I thank you very much for providing a little bit of extra information about the Don. So I thank you, Don, very much for the information. It helps us out a lot, Don. So I'll always make sure, Don, to provide as much information as I can, Don. And I thank you, Don, very much for giving us the brand new information about who Don is, Don. So thank you once again. And with that, we're moving on to the next question.
And moving on, we have another $10 donation from I Am the Goofy One, who says the Russian government has backed out of the trade deal, so soldiers have stayed to protect those that have walled out. Sorry, message on first did not get in.
Well, I thank you very much for the support once again. I'm the Goofy One. It's totally fine. You know, it is a little bit of a weird system to get used to, but that's fine. But to answer that question, well, to really answer that comment, I do see what you're saying, because pretty much as soon as the first defenders surrendered from the Azovstal, it already started circling around Russia. We're not giving them back. We're going to execute them. And the Azov defenders may have been really reluctant about this deal. And then once they started hearing that talk, and if they were able to hear it, then they may have backed out of it completely and started defying orders from the Ukrainian government and refused to surrender, because they do either way. They're pretty much kind of screwed at this point, and their fate's been sealed. And so they might as well go out fighting and at least survive free instead of living in shackles until they get their heads blown off by, some kind of Russian executioner. So I hope that addresses the comment, and I do thank you very much once again for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from William Allen again. Thank you very much, William. That is crazy support once again. You're in here every single night supporting the channel like crazy, and we appreciate it. He says the ship was from Campbelltown, a World War I four-stacker.
That's true. If anyone wants to know the exact ship he's talking about, let's pull up the Clemson-class destroyers. They were made by the United States, but then in World War II, we started to hand them out like party favors to anyone and everyone who needed one. And so here you can see a Clemson-class destroyer. This is the exact class of ship that ran into the San Nazaire port. We can actually find... didn't he give the name of the specific Clemson-class ship?
He said it was called Campbelltown.
HMS Campbell. Oh, there we go. This is actually a picture of the HMS Campbelltown rammed up onto the dry dock that's at San Nazaire. It hadn't exploded yet, obviously. So you can actually see the Clemson-class ship right here rammed up onto the dry dock. You can see it here again. I don't know why it's pink. Kind of a weird color. I've never seen it in color. And also we can see a painting here that they made of the Campbelltown running into the dry dock. It's an incredibly interesting story. And if you're into a good read on history, this is a great read. Every single story about this particular event is very thrilling, very interesting, and so if you're just into a very good story, this is about one of the best you can get that came out of real life. That's one thing that I find interesting, is that whenever people talk about fantasy stuff, I don't really get into it a lot, because honestly, things that have happened in real life are far more interesting than what's happened in fantasy sometimes, because it's so much more, like, complex, it's real, and people actually did it. And so that's why I'm always more of like a nonfiction person. I guess that's why I kind of know a decent amount about stuff like this, because I just, sit there and just harp on it. But thank you very much for the support and also bringing that up again. And it was a very interesting story, the San Nazaire raid. And it was a group of very daunting and brave men, much like we see commonly in the Ukrainian fighting forces with both the fighting men and women. And so with that, I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does address the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from a random trip who says, Enforcer, do you own any World War I war helmets or a German helmet as a souvenir? And all I have to say is take a look at that profile picture down there.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. And to answer that question, yes, I actually did own a 1917 Stahlhelm for a time, but I got rid of it because one thing that I always like is whenever I get helmets, they actually fit on my head, so that way if I ever did reenacting impression that needed that helmet, I could use it. So I did have a Stahlhelm for a short amount of time, then I sent it back, but I actually do have a World War II Brody helmet that the British had. That's actually the one I have on there in the profile picture. So we pretty much fixed it up where it looked like a World War I version of the Brody helmet. So that's kind of like my answer to the question is I don't have a World War I helmet. That's a World War II helmet, but they were pretty much the same pattern in like every way. So I hope that answers the question, and I do thank you so much for the support. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And I just realized that people might not know that's actually the Enforcer himself in his like reenactment uniform there in the profile picture. It's just been photoshopped really heavily. I guess some people might have thought that was actually just a picture off the internet, but it actually is the Enforcer, believe it or not.
Yeah, and what's the tough thing is that gas mask has like no like breathability in it, and so whenever I put that gas mask on, while that gas mask doesn't really make a perfect seal, well, it really does actually. That thing gets around my face and I can't breathe, and so I'm sitting like we have to take those pictures within like 20 seconds because it's so hot in there that you feel like you're dying as soon as you put that thing on and you can't breathe. And how it's like how the whole thing's set up, I don't want to breathe out of it because every time I put that thing on and I'm just kind of like breathing in there normally, my face is like black, like with coal and soot and stuff that's coming out of that thing. And so I'm scared to actually breathe out of that thing because I don't want that all of that going into my lungs because I'm maybe slightly asthmatic, although I haven't really gotten that confirmed by a doctor. They did at one point when I was a kid, and I've always been kind of a little concerned about flaring that back up, and I kind of get seasonal bronchitis, so I don't want to screw up my lungs beyond repair and like smoke like 50 packs of cigarettes in like 1 minute just breathing in out of that thing. So it is tough to take those kinds of pictures, but it was a very good one, and that's what we've been using ever since. And so that's actually me. Yeah, that's like the whole story. So anyways, with that, on to the next question.
So up next, we have an $8 donation from Yahweh, who says, a viewer, question mark, Loose Spring Russian 1918 quad captured in Ukraine 2022 on YouTube.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I will try and look into that. I think you're trying to tell me about a video with the leaf springs visible on the vehicle, and of course, we're huge fans of leaf springs here, so I'll try and take a look at it, and I do thank you so much for the support. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Big Dog CNC, who says, someone needs to come out with a mini RC Bayraktar. I would definitely buy. And yes, I would definitely buy that too. That would be really cool.
Oh man, Bayraktar. Wait a minute, hold on, let me get it right. Bayraktar. Wait a minute, hang on. And some of y'all who may have been around since the start of the stream tonight actually may have heard me say Bayraktar in the middle of the song, because that was something that Matthew and me were joking about here, because just for everyone to know, the waiting room is a deliberate decision, so that way everyone can get in here and get ready for the news. So it's actually a deliberate thing we added in waiting room music and stuff. I hope y'all like it. And also, another thing, now I'm getting really sidetracked, but the Morse code during the countdown when the sirens are going off actually has a message in it. We actually have some people in here who can decipher Morse code messages nearly instantaneously, and so I had to make this one a little bit more tough, and I actually made it with a cipher. And so I haven't heard anyone decipher the message yet, and so I just want y'all to know that it does have a cipher on it. It's one of the easier ciphers because I didn't want to make it too difficult, but it does use one of the easier ciphers, so the message looks jumbled if you can actually understand it, but it does have a rhyme or reason to it, and it actually has a message within it. You just got to find out what kind of cipher it is, and then give the message back to me, and then I'll tell you congratulations and thank you. We're thinking about taking that on a little bit further and maybe making a huge deal out of it, and maybe even having like prizes or something for the first person who figures it out, but we haven't really been thinking about all that too much yet because we're still just trying to like survive over here and keep our heads above water, making sure that the news is delivered. So with that, could you reread that question to me, Matthew? Because I went down that rabbit hole way too far.
So he wants to buy a mini RC Bayraktar.
Oh yeah. So moving back to that, I would like to have a mini RC Bayraktar too. And what would be really cool is if they actually put a little working camera on it. So that way it was like the real one, you know, and you could actually see where it was flying and stuff. So with that, I thank you so much for the support. Sorry I went down the rabbit hole there and started going into something else, but I do thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does address the comment away, because I'd like one too. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next one we have is a $5 donation from Mazur Lunchtime, who says, are you concerned about progress in Popasna, Lyman, and potentially Severodonetsk? Anyways, I got to get my lunch. Everyone else calls it breakfast.
Well, thank you very much for the support, Monsieur Lunchtime. And to answer that question, I don't see much progress being made anymore in the direction of Le Mans, and I don't see any more progress being made in Popasna either. And that's just answering that in brief. You know, we could go into a massive like deal as to why, but we go over that. I go over that every time I pass through that area. Severodonetsk, however, does appear to be a little questionable. And while I am pro-Ukrainian, I look at situations in an unbiased view, and it does look like the Russians have been making some small advances in this area that could be jeopardizing the defensive situation in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. They have pushed and captured Rubizhny, and so now they're very close to crossing the Severodonetsk Donetsk River. And if they manage to, that means that they would be within a high possibility of actually encircling Severodonetsk and Lysychansk and creating another unfortunate and terrible siege situation. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. Now, of those 2 out of the 3 areas, no progress is being made except for one. And that's kind of what I'm seeing right now. So thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And moving on, we have a $5 donation from Big Dog CNC again, who says Ukrainians are probably using something like no limit drones with a Z to hack the Mavics for privacy and to remove the restrictions. And I actually had no idea you could do that. I didn't know you could hack a Mavic and remove like the geofencing from it.
Interesting. I didn't know that either, and I think that guy is some guy we need to worry about. So get away from me, I'm just playing. But that's very interesting to know, and I thank you very much for sharing that information with us, because that's something that's probably new to everyone else on stream, because that's new to me. So I thank you very much once again for the support. I hope that does address the comment and the information in a way. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Bulletproof. Thank you very much for your donation to the channel. Very much appreciated. And next up, we have a $5 donation from C-Fe, who says, "Oh, on the DJI, I have a Mavic 2. I just looked, and my longest flight was 32,400 feet. That was a flight at over 6,000 feet in elevation." And that is incredible amount of distance there. I wonder if it was a one-way flight, or did it return back to home? Because that was very long for a two-way or a round trip is what I'm trying to say.
That's true. That thing pretty much flew all the way to Colorado and back from where we are. But I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does address the comment in a way. And that is interesting to know that the DJI Mavics actually can get a little bit of range on them, but I don't know how, because every time we fly ours, that thing is burning through battery. Maybe you were going really slow and that helps with the battery conservation and maybe the range, but with ours, that thing just eats through it. Like, we can't get further than 2 miles max before it's half battery. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that addresses the comment in a way, and it does help us to run our channel, that super chat. So I thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And Enforcer, probably part of the reason we don't get good battery life is every single day we bring our drone out to shoot with it. It's literally like a hurricane outside, and when the winds are bad, the battery drains pretty quick. So it's just bad luck when we have hurricane-type winds every time we go shoot a video.
That's true. Yeah, that's very true. Because one thing that's crazy is that every time we've gone and filmed, it's never been ideal. Even the last time we went and filmed, which was the third and final time, I'm never filming that video again. It's going to come out the way it is now. I actually started listening to the audio and there was a wind in it, and so it actually messed up a little bit of the audio. So I'm still going to put that video out just the way it is, because there's nothing I can do anymore. I can't go up there and film it a fourth time. I can't keep pushing the video back. It's in the process of being edited right now, getting ready to be put out. And that will, of course, be my face reveal, and then that's a whole other thing that's kind of holding this back, is that we're trying to make the face reveal a big deal instead of just popping on screen and just being there and talking. So I thank you all very much for having some patience with the video. Of course, that may have completely disappeared off y'all's radars, but it is in the progress of being made still. So it will be out soon, and y'all will finally see my face and be heavily disappointed. So with that, I thank y'all very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Andrew Reese, who says, "Wrong. Enforcer, they were told to do whatever they need to do to save their men's lives, not going against any orders if they choose to stay and fight."
No, I think that's kind of misinterpreting Zelensky's speech, because we heard him on stream go through that whole entire thing the other day, and he said they've been ordered to surrender because we need our heroes alive, and of course that is the most important thing to us, is making sure that they can live, and so they've been ordered to do what they need to make them survive. So that's kind of taking that out of context. But they were ordered to surrender. That's why 300 of them marched out of the Azovstal and surrendered to the Russians, because that was what their orders were. And so they, those units followed them. Those companies did. So I thank you very much for the support, but unfortunately that's not the way it turned out. Because if that was the going order, that's no different than what they've already been telling them. Because obviously the Ukrainians aren't going to tell the defenders, as their general standing order, find every way to get your soldiers killed quickly. Their orders are always, within the reason of making sure that as few lives are lost as possible. So I think that may be a misinterpretation. But I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does address the comment in a way. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And moving on, we have a $5 donation from Life Decoded, who says, "It's not much, Don, but please take my donation, Don." And they picked up on what I said earlier. I said donation earlier when I said was meant to say donation, so good catch.
And I thank you very much for the support and also playing on the Dawn thing. So with that, thank you once again. I like the joke. It's a pretty good one. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Jonathan Toe, who says, would be kind of poetic if the Azov regrouped later and liberated Mariupol, akin to MacArthur in World War II. Quote unquote, I have returned.
Yeah, that would be pretty neat. That would be a really cool idea. The question is, though, will they ever get them back? And hopefully they will, but we'll, of course, have to wait and see. And another thing is that would they be allowed to fight again? Would that be a condition of the agreement? Because what if they were found in the front lines again and there was some kind of agreement where they couldn't rejoin the army and then they were executed on sight? That's something that actually could happen, because that usually happens. So I thank you very much for the support. Maybe that's something that could happen in the future, but I just have to see how the events would turn out. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And I'm just noticing a thing in the comment, unfortunately, before we move on to the next one. I'm noticing a lot of people, surprisingly, because I didn't expect this, sort of are being harsh on the Ukrainian troops that surrendered. And I just have to say that I don't really understand that, because they fought so hard and they fought basically like to the very end. You have to have a little bit of respect for them for going the distance they did. When you're in that situation, it's probably a lot different. You know, we're all sitting behind a computer screen, but it's like when you're actually on the ground, that's a different situation for sure.
Yeah, that's true. And I haven't actually seen any of those comments unfolding, but that's something that I'm gonna have to just say frankly here. One thing, while I say people are calm and collected and they look panicked and stuff, I never say what I do in that situation. I really would like to suggest that no one does say what they would do, because it's really weird to me, because we're all sitting behind the comfort of a computer screen, and a lot of people have really big a really huge amount of courage when they're just sitting behind a computer saying something, but it's a totally different situation when you've been sitting inside of the Azovstal plant for 80 days, probably have never had a shower, you're running out of food, there's very little water, you're just trying to get by and survive, you're constantly being bombarded, you never get any sleep. And so I don't really like the idea of people pretty much sitting behind a computer screen and crapping on Ukrainian soldiers that have gone through hell for nearly 3 months and acting like they're cowards for surrendering. I mean, like, you know, you can talk about they're probably going to be executed and all that after they surrender, because that's a possibility. But at the same time, I'd suggest that everyone gives a lot of respect to those soldiers that surrendered, because they've been fighting for an incredibly long amount of time. And they were told by the Ukrainian government to surrender, and so I don't know why people are going to start trying to take it out on those defenders like they are some kind of cowards or something, because while we do a large amount of support, sure, I'm not over there with a rifle and I'm not fighting on the front line. So they are much more courageous than me, and so I'm not going to judge them a large deal for surrendering. That's something I could actually understand, being in their situation and going through what they've pretty much been through. So I didn't actually know that anyone said that. That was interesting to me, but anyways, on to the next one.
Okay, and up next we have a $50 donation from William Allen again, who says, didn't they just tell the troops that the mission was over, or was that something else? Knowing their fate, they might have thought the better part of valor is to die for their country.
Well, thank you very much for the support once again, William Allen. You're really helping us out, of course, with the massive amounts of support. And to answer that question, yes, they did say that the mission was complete. And some people are saying, and I saw someone say that a speech is different than a military order. But the thing is that you don't give a speech contradictory to your orders. That wouldn't make a lot of sense. You know, like I try and be polite with things like that, but come on, y'all. Like, I mean, like sometimes there's got to be a little bit of reason there. You're obviously not going to contradict what you're saying to your soldiers and go out in a speech and say something different. That wouldn't make any sense. But to answer your question, William, yes, they did say that. And so that part of saying that was in being like, they've done their job, it's time for them to surrender and not, you know, needlessly get themselves killed in the Azovstal. That was kind of the context behind it. And I know that a lot of people, and I don't know why, because while I'm pro-Ukrainian, you got to look at what actually happened. A lot of people keep on trying to make the claim, oh, they really weren't told to surrender, or they didn't surrender. I mean, like, some of them haven't, but some did, you know, and like, you know, it is what's happening. I'm just reporting exactly what's happening down there. So thank you very much for the support, William. And also, I could agree that, considering that they are believing, and it may be the case that their fate is that they'll just be executed or never sent back to Ukraine, that they may continue on to fight. I understand that motive, because obviously you're thinking that the Russians will just execute you. You're going to be dead either way, so you might as well just continue on and fight instead of giving up and just waiting for the day of execution. So I thank you very much for the support. I understand what you're saying, and yes, they were told that the mission was over, but to other people, I mean, like, I just got to make this clear. I am pro-Ukrainian, but, and apparently it may ruffle some people's feathers that sometimes I say when the Ukrainians are in a bad position, but when you're looking at an actual situation in a war, there's no time for emotions. It's like a large, and this sounds very detached, but it is pretty much a large strategy game that is being played in real life with real people on the line. And so when you look at a situation like that, if I was looking at a board game, like a tabletop board game, and looked at a situation like that, I'd be like, that's a bad one. It's a really bad situation, especially now that they're being told to surrender and they're not. That's even worse, because in real life and in historic situations, if you were given an order to surrender and you didn't, you are left to your fate at that point. Anything could happen to you. So I hope that kind of addresses that point. And I know that a lot of people aren't always happy hearing the truth sometimes, but when I look at when I look at actual battlefield situations, most of the time the Ukrainians are winning, but in the places that things aren't looking good for them, I'm just going to say it's not looking good for them. So I hope that kind of addresses that. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And just for those of you that are saying you didn't see the comments I was referencing earlier, that's because most of them were made earlier in the stream, and I actually got rid of them before most people could see them. So that's probably why you're saying that. But there have been actually surprisingly a decent amount that came in earlier like that, and that was kind of surprising. But up next, we have a $10 donation from Captain Chris 1220, who says, "Hey Don, I have some beer money for you, Don."
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and it's always wonderful to know that everyone's trying to get me alcohol. So thank you so much for the support. I actually don't drink, but it's always wonderful to know that when I ever want to, I will definitely have an open, well, not an open tab, I'll actually have a credit. So I thank you very much for the support once again. It does help out this channel a lot. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Senpai Arigato, who says, "The crazy thing is Ukrainians in the Azovstal are pretty much justified either way, considering they've been bombarded by, like, phosphorus and whatnot."
Could you reread that one to me real quick?
They said, "The crazy thing is Ukrainians in the Azovstal are pretty much justified either way, considering they've been bombarded by phosphorus and whatnot."
That's true. That's something that we did see around the last few days that the Azovstal held intact. Now it's holding in kind of like a fragmented way, from what we can tell. But yes, that is something we saw, and I would have to agree that that may be one of the other reasons why the Azov is not surrendering, is because they're thinking, if they're using phosphorus on us now and literally trying to burn us alive, imagine what they're going to do to us when we surrender. So I thank you very much for the support, and that is a pretty honest assessment. And you know, it's a very complicated thing. There's never a black and white answer to anything, and this is one of those situations where you can clearly see it. You can see why some of them want to surrender. They've been in there for 83 days, and they've been in hell, and so it's understandable that they would want to surrender. At the same time, it's understandable that they wouldn't want to surrender, because then they're thinking that they might be in a worse situation at the hand of the Russians. So I get both sides, but what I'm saying is that the Ukrainians gave them the order to surrender. They kind of surrendered in a way, and so those soldiers carried out their orders. The rest of them are kind of, just doing whatever now because they're trying to make sure that they survive. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question and kind of address what I'm thinking, and also kind of like, just really give my opinion. But I thank you very much for the support. I hope it answers the question, and with that, we're on to the next one.
And let me quickly recognize a few donations without comments. We have a $5 donation from San Santoy. We have a $2 donation from Secular Sakai, and a $2 donation from Freedom. And I thank you all for your support of the channel. And moving on, we have a $5 donation from Alexis Coleman, who says, "United 24 in US is Ukraine House DC Foundation," and she puts the EIN number.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I thank you for recommending another nonprofit to us. It's, of course, wonderful to know that we have a lot of people here in the community that would like to have different fundraisers supported, and I will look into that one and see about it, if possible. Maybe for this Sunday, if it's a possibility. Or depending on the situation, because I usually decide the nonprofits on the day of, figure out what the news is coming out, and then I try and relate the help we're giving to the news that's come out that day. So I thank you very much for support. I'll see if it's possible, but that's kind of the situation that usually unfolds. So it may happen, but it may not. Don't quote me on it, but I'll see about it. So I thank you very much once again, and with that, we're moving on to the next question.
And moving on, we have a $5 donation from Daniel Turner, who says, thoughts on, I'm thinking about to say thoughts on a clandestine mission to rescue Ironworks soldiers. The 101st did a World War II rescue after that bridge too far.
Hang on. You're going to have to reread that one to me again in a minute, because thoughts on a rescue mission.
I think that was a typo, hopefully.
Oh, hopefully it was. Golly. That's brutal. Okay. All right, let's reread that one more time.
So he says, thoughts on a clandestine mission to rescue Ironworks soldiers. The 101st did a World War II rescue after that bridge too far.
Yes, that's true. They did do a rescue during a bridge too far, but the thing is that with a bridge too far, the army wasn't too far away. At the closest, at the last bridge at Arnhem, they were only a mile away. And, you know, while they didn't achieve their objective of taking the Arnhem Bridge, they were still incredibly close. If you look at the front line right now near Mariupol, Ukrainian forces are nearly 30 miles away, and that's just too much ground for them to cover to ever make a, you know, clandestine evacuation of those soldiers. There's still a large amount of them in there, which would take a massive amount of vehicles. It would be spotted, and they would have to cover so much ground to get there. It's just not possible. There's no way for them to use boats either to try and get the defenders out, because the entire Sea of Azov is now in Russian-controlled territory. So there's no way for them to get out there. And, you know, I like to act like there is hope, but there's no hope for them to actually be evacuated. And that's why they've been given the orders to surrender. Because they either surrender and hope to survive, or they don't and they die. You know, and, you know, like, maybe it's time for me to just be entirely honest about the situation there. There's really nothing that Ukraine can do for the defenders of Mariupol. There's no way to send them supplies. There's no way to get them out. So they either fight to death or they surrender. That's really the only options they have. And that's just being honest, because I try and be hopeful about it and say that there is a chance. But when you really look at it, there's not. No way to get them out by boat. No way to get them out by land. No way to supply them. And so thank you very much for the support, but I don't think that any kind of, you know, operation to get them out would be successful, just because there's too many obstacles and there's too much ground to cover in between the Ukrainian front line and Mariupol itself. So, you know, it's an unfortunate situation, but honestly, that's what it is. And, you know, I'm here to report what's accurate and what's true, and that's what's accurate and true, is that there's really no way to help them. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does address the comment in a way. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Lyle Murphy, who says, please donate 10% to your Sunday fundraiser. I'd do more, but damn gas and baby formula are expensive, haha.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and that is something that we'll be trying to cover here in the future once the war is over and we start moving into a general news channel. Is, of course, we'll always be covering things like that are affecting common people, like gas prices and baby formula shortages and stuff like that, and why they're happening, and, you know, all the situations pertaining to it. Because, you know, everyone always wants to provide solutions and throw blame, but no one ever really explains why it's happening and the two different sides to a solution to the issue. And I think that would be very nice to have in news, and so hopefully I can deliver that. So with that, I thank you very much for the support, and it's totally fine. I thank you for any amount of support that you can give. And yes, things are getting a little bit more expensive lately, and so, you know, it's totally fine. I understand. And so thank you once again for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Jonathan Toe, who says, General George Patton said, the object of war is not to die for your country, but to make the other bastard die for his.
That's true. That is a quote that Patton said. And we can see the Ukrainians have been doing that to a T, considering that the kill-to-death ratio in between Ukrainian soldiers and Russian soldiers is 1 to 9. For every 1 Ukrainian soldier that's killed, the Ukrainians have killed around 9 Russian soldiers. So right now, they are really making the other poor dumb bastard die for their country, for sure. And it's, of course, wonderful to know, because that means that their defensive operations are going incredibly well, just based off of the casualty statistics alone. So once again, huge credit to the Ukrainians for having a very high level of training, high level of morale, and confidence in their actual battle plans and their execution. So with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the comment. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Estelle C., who says, God bless the Azov Battalion. I so hope they get home. Great informational channel, and Slava Ukraine.
And I thank you so much for the support, and I can't agree. I hope that they do get home. It's a very difficult situation for them, so we'll just have to wait and see, of course, how they make it home if they can. And also, another thing, and I do thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to another question, but we're actually going to move on to a question from the live chat, and I think it would be interesting to maybe delve into a little bit of news, at least pertaining to the United States here, because I thought this was interesting. It's something you can kind of like... I guess you could say non-biasedly talk about. Thomas Gutowski says, why isn't the USA ramping up oil production? Excellent question, and it has a very complicated answer. And of course, it's like deeply rooted into the opposing parties. I'm not getting into what's right or what's wrong, but I'm going to explain the situation like I did the German energy crisis a while ago. So the United States isn't ramping up oil production because right now the current administration sees it as beneficial to try and outsource our oil, our oil needs pretty much to a foreign country. The main goal behind that, you know, they can say whatever they want, but the main goal behind that is to have some kind of economic power over the country we'll choose. And so it's been a large amount of contention that a lot of these countries are our rivals, like Iran, Venezuela, and a couple of other countries. But the thing is that if you start to buy a large amount of oil from these countries, you can start to control what they do by threatening to stop the purchase of oil from them. And so right now, the current administration is seeing it as beneficial. And, you know, before everyone starts saying I'm picking a side here, I'm not. I'm about to go explain the other side and why it has its ups and downs as well. While that is what the current administration is trying to achieve, the whole goal is to try and exert more control internationally over countries that are not really aligned with us and try and make them more aligned to us just because they're economically tethered to us. There's, of course, a disadvantage to that. One, they could actually mess with the oil prices on their own. And so then we're kind of in a little bit of a catch-22 there, because while we're kind of economically controlling them, at the same time, it leaves us to where we could be put in a lurch because they could just completely stop sending us oil or something could happen like right now. And then we're going, well, where does the oil come from? So then that brings us to the other side, which is producing the oil domestically. And that's something that, you know, is a pretty big deal. A lot of people think that domestic oil production is the way to go. And there are, of course, benefits to it. For example, gas prices will remain pretty steady. That's something that's guaranteed pretty much because the oil production will be done in the United States. And so the United States will largely have the control of how much oil they export and how much we actually have in supply. So you can actually do a lot of price fixing there and actually make the prices much lower and much more manageable. On the other hand, it does have the drawback that we no longer have the possibility of some kind of economic control over a foreign country that may be a rival or may be somewhat hostile in their stance towards us, and it doesn't really allow us that extra bit of control around the world. So that's kind of like the rundown of why currently we're not trying to produce oil domestically, and it is causing some issues with the gas prices and things like that. But, you know, of course, that's the direction that the current administration is going in because that political party is believing that that is the direct direction to go. Whether it's right or not, I don't get into that. But that's kind of the rundown of the situation with why gas prices are rising and why domestic oil production isn't actually occurring. So I hope that answers the question, and I hope you'll kind of get a glimpse of what the videos will probably be like in the future. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And I'm seeing a lot of, without delving into it too much, I'm seeing a lot of people saying that, you know, sort of like a cartel controls the oil prices around the world. And yes, OPEC does do that. But I believe when we're producing our oil domestically, I don't think OPEC has any leverage over our pricing when we're selling it and producing it domestically, if I'm correct.
That's pretty true for the large part. The United States actually exports a large amount of oil. Back when we actually domestically produced a large amount of it, we exported a lot of it. So yeah, you know, when we actually produce domestically a large amount of our oil, it allows OPEC to have less control over us. And then that's another facet of why, you know, there's a huge argument over domestic versus foreign production of oil. And, you know, and really honestly, there's pros and cons to both sides. And with everything in politics, there's not a right answer. You can find a right answer in either of them, really, if you look at it the right way. But that's kind of like the two sides that we've got right now. And so I hope that y'all like that, you know, because that's generally how we're going to be covering all the news in the future when I actually cover normal news. Is I'm just going to be going over the pros and cons of both sides, why both sides believe what they do, and why they're doing it. You know, so that's kind of what is in store for the future. So I thank you very much for the question, and I hope that does answer it. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
All right, and next up, we have a $10 donation from Junebug72 who says, "Have a good night, glory to Ukraine, and glory to the heroes."
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I can agree. Glory to Ukraine and glory to the heroes. They've been doing an incredibly good job defending their country, and I do think that they will continue on for an incredibly long time, especially with Western support in terms of arms and equipment. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Senpai Arigato again, who says, "By the way, can you link all of the music you use in your intros in your description?"
I would like to actually, but it's a little tough because the music is really picked kind of ad hoc. I just kind of go through the playlists I have on YouTube, and I'm like, oh, I like that one. Let's play that tonight. And so that's just kind of what I do. So I thank you very much for the support. I will try and do that if I can. The actual anthem of Ukraine I play is done by some band. I forgot what name they are, but it's a very, very good band to have the anthem play. I think it's the best version of the Ukrainian anthem. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Lawrence Krieger, who says, "Thanks for the great coverage."
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad that you do enjoy the coverage here on this channel. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from C. Fee, who says, "It was from mountaintop in the Sierras, about 7,000 feet in altitude in S mode round trip." Okay, they're referring to that drone flight they were talking about earlier.
Maybe it was able to fly really far because the air was less dense.
Could be.
Could be. I'm not really sure, though. But I thank you very much for providing a little bit of, you know, well, of course, some support, and also giving us a little bit of extra information about where that drone was that may have led to it having a record-long flight time. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support and also sharing that information with us. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And Kevin Scott 76 said, "I hope my super chat isn't overlooked. It is different." Kevin Scott, I'm not sure if that went through or not, or I'm not going to say I possibly didn't miss it, but I haven't seen it. So if you want to put that in the chat, I will read it off in just a moment, since I'll give you the benefit of the doubt on that one because I might have missed it. So up next, we have a $3 donation from Yahweh, who says, "United 24 in USA equals Ukraine House DC." And they give the EIN number again. I think that might be a duplicate, potentially.
Mm-hmm.
Or they send the same thing twice.
Could you reread that one more time just for me to make sure?
United 24 in USA equals Ukraine House DC.
Oh, yeah, they did. They did. And so I thank you very much for the support. Apparently that was a duplicate, so I'm sorry about that. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $2 donation from Mr. Lunchtime, who says, "Cancel my subscription to the Resurrection."
Okay, I thank you very much for the support. I don't know what that's talking about, but I thank you. It does help us to run this channel. And with that, we're on to the next question.
Let's see here. And up next, we have a $5 donation from Kwai Gamer, who says, "With a rough estimate of 11,567,000 barrels per day, the United States is the top oil-producing country in the world, as it has been for many years."
That's true. The United States is the top oil-producing country in the world. But one thing is that I believe that the amount of oil we produce, if I'm correct, let me make sure. How many barrels of oil does the U.S. use a day? We use 19.78 million barrels a day. And so we actually outuse the amount of barrels we produce here in the United States by around 8 million, nearly. So that's kind of why we actually have to export oil from around the world to make sure that we have enough oil to pretty much operate per day, or we have to up the domestic production to account for the discrepancy, well, the deficit that we're kind of having. So that's kind of the issue, and I can see a lot of people kind of getting a little miffed down in the comments section about what I said, and I don't know how, because I literally kept it as non-biased as possible and didn't go into it too much. So I mean, honestly, at that point, I literally kept that as neutral as possible. If you had a problem with it, I'm sorry, but that's just going to have to be how it is, because, yeah. So anyways, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, I believe this is the last super chat of night. We have a $2 donation from DD Reynolds, who says, "That cat was a fake. He's really a dog."
Well, I thank you very much for the support. And, of course, that's a pretty funny joke. Every once in a while, we do have like a huge wave where people be like, "Oh, that's fake." But I'm telling you, not a lot of stuff is fake. And like, why in the world, you know, like with the one you're talking about, I think I know which one you're specifically stating. Why would they fake that? But real quick, I'm gonna look through something. So give me just a second, and give me just a second, Matthew. Just gotta look through something real quick. And the answer to your question, Matthew, is no. So, with that,
Okay, I thought so.
So with that, we're now going to move on to the next. Wait, was that the last super chat of the night?
That was the last super chat of the night. So we are moving on to the live chat questions, and the first one we have is from Pakatang, who says, "The benefits of treating prisoners well seems obvious. What would be the benefit of treating prisoners badly, even if you were going to interrogate them later?"
Could you reread that one more time?
So Pakatang said, "The benefits of treating prisoners well seems obvious. What would be the benefit of treating prisoners badly, even if you're going to interrogate them later?" And if I could, Enforcer, I will say, Pakatang, my take on that would be they might be trying to soften them up, so that way when they do interrogate them later, they're sort of broken down and they're easier to sort of manipulate. That's just my take on it.
That's generally true. And also the other thing is that treating them well has a lot of benefits as to treating them poorly. Treating them well is just, of course, the morally right thing to do, and of course the right thing to do by the rules of war. It's also going to ensure that the other side keeps civil when they capture your soldiers. And that's the most important thing with the prisoner of war exchange. The prisoner of war situation is that you always have to remember that what you're doing to the prisoners you just captured is what those enemy soldiers may be doing to the prisoners they capture from your side. So that's really what's important to keep in mind, is if they treat them badly, it's not really benefiting them at all. It may make the Ukrainians start treating the Russian prisoners they take incredibly poorly as well. So I hope that answers the question, and with that, we're on to the next one.
And Pakatang actually put in pretty good questions tonight. I got another one from Pakatang, who says, "Enforcer, are soldiers training how to take prisoners? Were soldiers in World War I trained how to take prisoners?"
Soldiers in World War I were not trained how to take prisoners. I can tell you that for certain. When it happened, it was like, oh, what do I do? And then you're like, well, just send them back somewhere behind the line, and then someone will figure it out back there. And in World War I, it was actually kind of common to just shoot them if you were in the middle of an offensive, because there was really nothing you could do. Usually the front line was in such disarray, because usually officers were killed incredibly quickly, so the chain of command just broke down, and you had a whole bunch of dudes just up there in the middle of German trenches without any sort of command structure. And so if a prisoner surrendered, it's like, oh, well, this is a burden. So they would just take him out of the trench. They would walk them a decent ways through no man's land, and then the gunshots of them shooting the prisoners just kind of blended in with the rest of them, and then they go back up to the front lines. And if they had to report to anyone about it, they just say, oh, they got dropsy disease, which was pretty much the slang term for saying I shot them, because there was no way for me to actually take them anywhere. So in terms of training in World War I, very little. In the modern day, there's a decent amount of training from what I know, and of course I'm not an expert on military training, but I do believe there is a decent amount of training that unfolds about the capturing of enemy prisoners if something like that was to become a commonality. We did see in the pretty much the, I guess you could say, Gulf War, when the Iraqi army started to surrender en masse to the United States, and also during 2003, during the invasion of Iraq. The United States generally handled prisoners incredibly well, and they were taking on a massive amount of them. I mean, like tens of thousands at some points. So I hope that kind of addresses the question, and with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have one from Spencer Ellis, who says, I listened to the leaked Russian phone calls, and they have been asking for drones from their grandmas and moms and whatnot. I thought a lot of the calls were just propaganda, but maybe not.
Maybe they're not. I'm not really sure. I never go into phone calls because it's really hard to verify a phone call. Anyone could be on the ends of those phones from either side saying whatever they want. And so that's something I never really go into all too much because I feel like there's too much questionability about the verification of the source, because it could just be faked. And that's something I'm always thinking about with phone calls, is that you can't ever see the people on the phone, and you can't ever know where they are and what they're, there's just too many questions for me. So I never really look into phone calls all too much. And that's also why they're never on stream. So unfortunately, I can't really answer that question because I just generally never look at them. Whenever I see a phone call and I'm going through like trying to find my information, I just skip over it usually, because I just don't know if there's any credibility to it or not. So with that, I hope that answers the question, and we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from Mountain of Entities, who says, Enforcer, are there radars that pick up small drones? And real quick, Mountain of Entities, I will say that DJI actually sells a system. I can't remember the name of it. It's like Arrow something, Arrow Beacon or Arrow Port. It actually allows people to see the locations of drones, where the receiver is at and where the drone's at. I'm not sure if maybe the Russians or somebody over there has access to that technology, or otherwise they might be able to pinpoint the exact location where the operator's standing, and that's how they can send like a missile to their location. But that's my understanding.
And I think, by and large, there's not really any radar systems that can pick them up all too well, because we most of the time see surface-to-air missile batteries never being activated when a drone's flying right over them. So I think for the large part, radars aren't able to pick them up because their cross-section is so small they look like a bird, most likely. And so I hope that answers the question. Because I think that may be the reason why they go undetected, is because usually these drones are rather small, and they might just show up as something bird-sized on a radar. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, real quick, I just want to recognize one more super chat. We have from William Allen, who puts in a $20 super chat and says, Enforcer, keep in mind that the Russians eliminated 100 of thousands of German POWs that never returned to Germany. Putin is a Stalinist. Do you think he might follow in Stalin's footsteps on POWs?
I mean, that's a tough one. I mean, like, the only reason they got away with that in World War II is because Germany was a defeated nation, and no one was going to come for those Germans, because there was no country that was going to be responsible for them. That wasn't anyone's citizens anymore. Germany was divided up into occupation zones for a little while after the war. So that's why Stalin got away with it. As to what's going on now, if Ukraine wins, which they most likely will, we see that they're very much in the progress of holding back the Russians and also pushing them back in some areas. I don't think they'd be able to get away with that, because the Ukrainians would say there are prisoners that never returned, and we know that they're still in Russia. And then there would still be massive political pressure and economic pressure from the entirety of the world to try and ensure that they will return those soldiers. So I do believe that while Putin would love to follow in Stalin's footsteps, I'm sure he would love to try and keep them in Russia and torture them for 10 years before they ever got sent back. I don't think it'd be possible, just due to the external pressure that would be exerted on the Russians, to send those soldiers back. So I thank you very much once again for the support, William Allen, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have another question from Pakatang, who says, Enforcer, historically, is it better for civilians in an occupied territory to actively resist their occupiers, or to wait passively for their military to reclaim their territory?
With that, I mean, like, it's really tough to give an answer to some questions like that one, because there's really not a right answer. I mean, like, you know, it just depends on what kind of person you are. I mean, like, it may be better for you to sit at home and do nothing. It may be better for you to go out and fight against them in some kind of way, like a partisan. There's not really a right answer to that question, because you can look through history and you can see that people who didn't resist suffered. You can see people who resisted suffered, and then you can see people who didn't resist that didn't suffer. And then you see people who resisted that didn't really suffer anyways either. So there's really no right answer to it. It just kind of depends on what they're feeling. So unfortunately, I just really can't give an answer on that one, because it's a gray area, you know, because you could do whatever you wanted and then the outcome isn't like a binary like answer to it. It could always be different. So unfortunately, I really can't answer that question too well. But of course, everyone's always faced with those two options, doing nothing or standing up against them. So with that, I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers the question in a way. I'm sorry I can't answer it too well, but that's something I really can't even have an opinion on, because it just kind of matters what the situation is. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a question from Martin R., who says, what if Ukraine would win more ground in Donbass and the south, free up all the country, and Russia would not stop sending rockets to Ukraine? Any idea?
Could you reread that one more time?
They said, what if Ukraine would win more ground in Donbass and the south, free up all the country, and Russia would not stop sending rockets to Ukraine? Any idea?
At that point, the Ukrainians will most likely just start trying to buy up missile defense systems like Iron Domes and such things like that, and it would end up like a massive Israel-Palestine situation where mortars and rockets are sometimes lobbed over the border. They get shot down, hopefully, most of the time they would, and the war would just kind of grind to a stalemate, and neither side would really do anything against the other, but there would always be just a little bit of action in between them. It'd kind of be like North Korea and South Korea, honestly. That's kind of how they still are. In a way, although there hasn't been a lot of activity like that recently. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And I just saw trademarks and patents for growing businesses say in the chat that he remembers when gas was 67 cents a gallon back in 1999. And my goodness, I wish it was that way today. I heard today that gas is going to go up to $6. Is going to be the national average in like the next few weeks. And it's just this. How does gas get up to $6 a gallon? I mean, I don't even understand how people can afford that.
Really, honestly, it's a pretty tough situation, but hopefully there can be some kind of solution found in the future to it. So with that, you know, of course, I don't want to get too political. I try and answer unbiased. And then I saw some guy called Justin. He was going to go frothing in the chat, which was hilarious. You don't know nothing about it. I don't say I'm an expert, but that's my take on it. That's how I'm looking at it. So, you know. And that was crazy to me. I was busting out laughing. But anyways, with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
So our next question is from Don Mimal, who says, I'm waiting for the Ukrainians to announce more Russian tanks have been delivered since the war started than they had before it started. Or did that happen already?
That one was a little bit tough for me to follow. Could you reread that one?
So let me read it real quick and see here what he was trying to say. He says, I'm waiting for the Ukrainians to announce that more Russian tanks have been delivered since the war started than they had before it started, or did that happen already?
Oh, yeah, they already report that daily, and they're always saying they're so appreciative for the Russians for their support. I mean, like, if it wasn't for the Russians supporting Ukraine right now, think about the quagmire they'd be in. There would be no way they could stand up against Russia. So I thank you very much for saying that. That's a pretty good joke, actually. And yes, they pretty much said that a lot at this point, and pretty much make the numbers very public about how many tanks they've actually managed to capture intact and usable condition. And so with that, I thank you very much for the support, and well, not support. I thank you very much for the question. I hope that does answer it in a way. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
So that is actually the last question I have in the spreadsheet tonight. So that is actually it.
All right, and with that, let's take a look at trademarks and patents. I've seen trademarks and patents throwing down a load of interesting information about the oil and gas stuff. I mean, like, honestly, I think he's probably the most knowledgeable person in here about oil and gas and stuff like that. So to answer some questions, I'm just going to grab a few out of the live chat. So Oh, also, Matthew's going to roll a little bit early, so we'll see him around. Of course, everyone tell Matthew goodbye. He's been wonderful tonight. It helped us out a lot with the questions, and so we'll all see you around, Matthew. Take care, and make sure to get some sleep.
All right, and everybody take care. It's good seeing everybody again. We'll see you tomorrow at our usual time, or at least I will. Enforcer's going to stay on for a little while. And before you get off tonight, make sure to go check out the merch. We had a fun time designing the merch this time. So thank you, everybody, for watching, and I'll catch you all tomorrow.
And so with that, Matthew has just rolled on out. And with that, I'm going to answer 2 more questions from the chat, and then I'm going to roll 2. So let's see. Okay, so let me go through, and let me try and see if I can find some. Enforcer Fans has the Enforcer Matt, did you all hear about the 10 NATO ships in the Baltic near St. Petersburg? I have not. I don't really focus on a lot of news outside of this war, sadly, because it takes up a lot of time to find it. So sadly, I haven't heard about that. But I would be interested to hear it, and I don't think it would be out of the realm of possibility, because nothing's stopping them from going into the Baltic. Moving on to the next question. William O. said, why you stop saying that being said? Well, the reason why is because a lot of people complained about it, and while I found it funny, you know, because it was something I did a lot, you know, when you do the stream enough, you just start doing the same thing over and over. So many people were annoyed by it that I started saying with that and stuff like that to cut it down, so that way people weren't like down there just, you know, like foaming and, you know, being tired of hearing it. So that's kind of the answer. Let's see, what else do we have at the Enforcer? June 4th, 1942, the last time America declared war on anyone. Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania. That's true. They didn't actually declare war beyond that. They've always done some kind of a deal with Congress. It's a weird situation, but pretty much we've never declared war beyond those 3 countries in 1942. We didn't declare war in Korea. We didn't declare war in Vietnam or on Iraq. And it's really weird when you think about it, because they are wars, but we don't declare war. You know, it's kind of weird. And let's move down here. At the Enforcer, my Australian government announced today they're sending another 20 Australian Bushmasters over to Ukraine. That's nice, and I thank you so much for telling us, Gabby, because that is, you know, wonderful to hear. Of course, we know that the Bushmasters are an incredibly cool-looking armored truck, and we know that the Ukrainians are needing all the supplies they could get, and we've seen them using Bushmasters already, and I've got to say, that if for anything, they are incredibly cool-looking. Vitali said, Enforcer, did you see what Moldova's president said regarding Russian troops in Transnistria? I didn't, actually, and I'll have to try and look at that if I can. Let's see, what else do we have? So, let's see, what else? At the Enforcer, it's your trademark, don't ever give up. All right, and with that being said, we're going to move on to the next one. And also, I'm going to run a poll real quick. Well, no, I'm not. I'm just going to say this, okay? Because I kind of want to make this clear, and there's very few people here, which, it doesn't matter, it's fine. When the channel runs in the future, I'm going to try and I'm not going to try. I'm going to keep things as unbiased as possible. And I'm always going to present the pros and cons of both sides. That's what news ought to do. And I don't know why people have to act like it's wrong to do that. And everyone always acts like there's an obvious right answer. And, you know, just being real here for a minute and just like speaking my mind, I don't understand why people have to be like that. I don't. Because life is too short to be caught up on very abstract things. You know what I mean? And so, I don't know, you know, that's why I look at the situation as just the way they are. I mean, like, I can support something, sure, but when I actually sit down and look at the situation, I'm just going to sit here and say, you know, it looks like this, it looks like that. I do that with politics over here, although I'm never going to get into what I side with or anything. But it's always weird to me whenever I sit there and say I'm going to do that. I get a load of support for wanting to do that, and then when I actually sit here and kind of like divulge unbiased opinions and statements about like what I would go into, then everyone wants to start turning because they don't like it being unbiased, and then everyone wants to say there's an obvious side, and I hear everyone saying both sides. But the thing is that if it was, you know, like to me, if it was an obvious answer, then why are there 2 sides to it? You know, like with anything, you could pick any topic. You know, if the answer was so obvious and clear, why are there 2 different groups of people saying 2 different things? 2 opposite things most of the time. And, you know, that tells me that there's never a right answer to the thing, or else everyone would just be on the same page, and they would be like, you know, it's right. So, anyways, you know, that's all I've got. So, Anyways, I thank you all so much for the support, and with that, we've wrapped up the end of tonight's stream. If you did enjoy the stream, and hopefully that didn't turn y'all off, but if y'all did enjoy the stream, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We do run these streams every single day at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, covering the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine, and in the future, we will, of course, be trying to branch out into things in the future. And so, once again, I thank you all very much, and I'll see y'all all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you, and I'll see y'all then. Good night, and take care.
Come on.